everybody. Welcome to the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for October 27th, 2020. I'm just going to give our regular introduction each morning for the public that's watching. You're registered as attendees, and as attendees, you are just simply viewers of the meeting. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted. However, there'll be a time for public comment, and if you're interested in delivering public comment today, we'll ask you at that time to raise your virtual hand. You should have a hand icon on your device, and you just need to click it once. When the comment begins, our meeting organizer will call the names, and when your name is called, you'll be unmuted, and you'll be able to speak for up to 3 minutes. And then when you're done, you'll be muted again, and you can watch as long as you'd like. We'll try to give everybody time who wishes to present public comment an opportunity to speak, but please note if there's more people wishing to speak than the time is allotted, we may need to limit speakers or reduce the number of minutes per speaker or have speakers selected randomly. We haven't had to do that so far, and hopefully not today as well. So with that, I also wanted to let the audience know that Commissioner Bozovich is out and is excused today. So we have our 4 commissioners this morning. We'll start with item 1 on our agenda. Any adjustments to the agenda from anybody? Don't see any. So we'll go to item 2. Is there any emergency business? Don't see any emergency business either. So we'll go straight into public comment. And this is the time, if you are an audience member and you wish to give public comment, to raise your virtual hand and click on that hand icon device. And I'll turn it over to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, I will call upon Nicole DeGraff for her public comments. I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. You are self-muted.
Hello, good morning. Yes, I just have a few questions. I did go back and look at listen to the other meetings because last week Commissioner Burney said I might not like the answers I'm given, but that my questions may be answered. And so they were forgotten. I sent an email to Judy Williams, who's I believe she's a community liaison for COVID. And so in addition to sending you guys these questions, excuse me, and then asking them this morning, I've emailed them. So, you know, I'll stop calling in and asking if I get these questions answered. And I don't mean to seem strident. There's just so much at stake here. I received 2 texts this weekend about middle schoolers who took their own life, and the consequences of lockdowns and school closures are really great. My own son said he's sad, but he hides it well. And I'm just wondering how many kids are hiding it well until they cannot. And if our foundation of metrics is flawed, meaning the test, then, you know, if our closures are metrics and metrics are using flawed tests, you know, it's pretty frustrating. And so I just have a few questions. This is for the Lane County Public Health. Can you reassure the public 100% that asymptomatic people you're testing through schools and screening and reservoir tests are not, in fact, just functional false positives? Did you know that neither test that we use was authorized by the FDA to be used in asymptomatic individuals? Are you retesting in 1 to 2 days if no symptoms continue, like the U of O football players? I understand all those positives are asymptomatic. And so I'm just wondering if they're retesting. I know about Florida and the White House having a task force to investigate testing, as the NFL did. And I'm just curious if there's any plans for Lane County Public Health to investigate as well. I just question the education side of this whole coronavirus campaign in Lane County, because 75% of students at U of O were surveyed that they're non-susceptible individuals compared to age groups with a higher risk. They think COVID poses a great threat, but yet 99.74% of those who contract COVID survive. So the perception of risk doesn't line up, and all we seem to be focused on is mass messaging. And since the post-mask mandate, Oregon has seen a 4.5 increase of cases. And my biggest question is a lab question for Dr. Lutke, in that PCR tests pick up dead viral fragments for 12 weeks. So I was just wondering what he thought about that in our testing. And then most importantly is the cycle thresholds. Are we testing at a lower rate than 30 to 35? And I have sent articles to the commissioners a few times on the evidence that a higher cycle threshold is too high to produce accurate tests when there's no symptoms.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. DeGrasse.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will call upon Mike McFadden. Mr. McFadden, I will unmute you, and you may begin your public testimony. There you go.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I wanted to give a brief comment this morning in support of the future agenda item that's coming on the agenda later in the meeting for additional funding to be provided to the Lane County Sheriff's Office for rural patrol. Not only because of the emergency recovery and disaster recovery that will be going on up the McKenzie for a long, long time. Lane County has been in need of more rural patrol from the Sheriff's Office even before we were in a disaster recovery. So I do support that. You know, as more people live, work, and play all across our county, there's going to be the need for law enforcement services for those folks. And so I think that this is an important thing to invest in. And the thought of where the funds are coming from for this investment, you know, gave me sort of the thought to want to actually talk about the history of the O&C lands and, you know, how any type of funding that's tied to them is kind of a fraught deal because of the decline in timber revenue and you know, the fact that the county doesn't, you know, collect any property tax from the federal government on all of that land, which is all interestingly laid out in its unique sort of checkerboard pattern, which seems just inherently to be ascientific in our modern era. Like, how can you apply science consistently in a management program across such a checkerboard of public-private land? But the interesting thing I wanted to go over just is the history of how this all came about, which was, you know, way back in the history of early state history, or perhaps even prehistory in the colonial time when they were trying to get settlers to come here. There was a grant given by Congress to a railroad company, which then was given checkerboards to sell off to help finance the venture. And this became, you know, one of the most notorious land fraud scandals in the history of the country, and involved members of Congress from the Oregon congressional delegation and everything. And long story short is that Congress eventually realized the mistake it had made and took back control over these lands, but then realized that you know, the counties with so many of these lands in their jurisdictions then faced the really big financial problem of having these lands be a part of their jurisdiction, but not really having any income and so I think this law enforcement situation we're in Lane County really is important to kind of maintain our focus on how do we develop new revenue streams to support critical functions. You know, looking back on the whole sordid history of the O&C lands and how the native peoples who lived there were not even considered human, and, you know, the racist Governor Lane massacred them and all, you know, we really need to revisit that. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Chair Buck, at this time, I show no other people signed up for public comment, so I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to commissioner response or remonstrance. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thanks very much for this opportunity to respond to public comments and present a remonstrance. First of all, as to the public comment, I agree. I think that the checkerboard system was entirely, you know, a function of how easy it would be to carve up the ancestral lands, and it has really nothing to do with modern ecological management of those lands. And thanks for presenting that public comment. Another thing I'd like to mention is that the temperatures in early October and late October are getting very, very cold, and there's a number of people that are really suffering as a result of our overall community's inability to keep up with the tremendous demand of homeless people and the number of people that have been displaced from their homes or never had homes. And I just want to thank the people that are working so hard in the public and nonprofit sectors to do what they can, but to recognize, at least from a government standpoint, that there needs to be a lot more done than is being done to deal with the suffering that's out there. And I just want to thank all those volunteers in particular in the nonprofit groups that are doing what they can to shelter and feed people that are out in this bitter weather. And finally, I'd like to mention something that's rather sad and has been in the news a bit, and that is the death of Congressman Jim Weaver. He served the Oregon 4th Congressional District with distinction for 12 years. He passed many national laws that are still on the books today, and most notably for Lane County, the Payments in Lieu of Taxes Act that funds counties that are public land counties throughout the United States. He was on the conference committee that produced that legislation in his first year, second year as a member of Congress, one of NACO's outstanding supporters in Congress. He also passed legislation dealing with health, namely the National Organic Agriculture Act that to this day authorizes labeling of organic products. He co-sponsored that legislation with Senator Leahy of Vermont, the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee at the time. It's still on the books. He sponsored many wilderness bills in Oregon, including saving the French Peat Wilderness east of Eugene. And his main legacy, he's always said after he left Congress, was in the large number of elected officials that worked for him, and that included people like Dick Eyman, the former Speaker of the Oregon House of Representatives, Grattan Cairns, former state senator, and also former Speaker of the Oregon House of Representatives, Ron Ekus, state representative from the River Road area, who went on to be on the Public Utility Commission, Mike McGinn, who later became mayor of Seattle, Peter Sage, Jackson County Commissioner, and myself included. I would never have been a state senator or a Lane County Commissioner without having the experience of working for Congressman Weaver. And of course, his most enduring legacy that continues is Congressman Peter DeFazio, who, after working for Jim in both the Eugene office and the Washington, D.C. office, went on to become a Lane County Commissioner, and then most notably as Oregon's longest serving congressman, and continuing to serve in the House on just many, many issues, and showing the same kind of courage that Jim Weaver showed. So it was a sad time for those of us who had a personal relationship with Jim Weaver to see him passing at age 92, but one that is rather inevitable for all of us. And I just wanted to comment on his tremendous service to the district and to the nation. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And Commissioner Sorensen, thank you for pointing out Jim Weaver's passing. At 93 years old, he served for a long, long time, testified frequently to the Eugene City Council during the years that I was a city councilor, never lost touch, and never lost his keen edge. I'm sure you're far more aware of that than I am, Pete. So with sadness. Chair Buck, I'm going to direct this to Mr. Mokrahajski, and it's a bit of a softball perhaps. And I'm going to ask that during your items from administrator later in this morning's meeting. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about Lane County's response to the very cold nights over the weekend. And at the same time, Chair Buck, I'm going to look at you and talk about the fact that I drove around throughout the weekend and noticed so many empty warehouses, stores, government buildings that potentially could have been used or may be able to be used in the future for as warming centers. As we struggle through the fact that Egan warming centers are not going to be able to provide congregate warming shelters overnight, we have an early taste of the cold. It was cold and dry, which is far easier to manage and navigate than cold and wet, which is going to start in about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe as early as next week. And so what we talked about at the Poverty and Homelessness Board Subcommittee on Shelter last Thursday was everybody in every jurisdiction needs to be looking for empty spaces that potentially could be used for small shelters during the warming during the crisis. And shelters, I believe, personally, and I'm seeking more and more input on this, can involve a large covered area, even one without walls, such as a large pavilion, which does not necessarily provide shelter from the bitter cold, but it keeps people dry. And wet and cold is really what kills. It's not just straight cold in our environment. It's usually wet and cold. So, Ms. Mokrajewski, I'll ask if you'll talk a little bit about what Lane County did over the weekend. I went by the fairgrounds yesterday, and I was by there this morning. And then we can also engage in a discussion starting today until we solve the issue. How do we house people during the very cold winter that's ahead of us? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioner remonstrance? Commissioner Bray.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to build a bit on what Commissioner Farr said. A year and a half ago, I requested county staff to inventory and work with commercial brokers, warehouses, private commercial space, et cetera, that was vacated, that perhaps could pose this type of emergency shelter. If that came back, I apologize. I don't recall that it ever did. I pushed and I felt like, okay, I'm pushing too much. This is the second winter now that I've had the opportunity to be a county commissioner. And I think this commission, our county staff does incredible amounts of stuff. I mean, there's no criticism there. Please don't take it that way. I think we have the most action-oriented public body that I'm aware of in this county. However, I think that we all need to figure out a way that, here we are, it's November, it's cold, it's going to get wet, there's going to be people out there. We now have COVID exacerbating all of that stuff. I think we need to make a commitment to, whether it's vacated stores in malls, whether it's pavilions in parks, whatever it is, whether it's following the lead of the recent Springfield City Ordinance, that everyone will have shelter, will have dry, warm shelter. Too late this winter, but it has to be in place next winter. We can't keep kicking this can downhill. And we're doing the best we can. Again, no criticism. I also want to state to the gentleman who one of his quotes was, we need new revenue streams to support vital county functions. I think Oregon is undercapitalized. I think units of government are undercapitalized. I think there is a growing mismatch between the public interest needs that are going unmet and the ability of government to service those needs. And I think that's an issue that, that in this particular moment that we live in may in fact start to be addressed, because no county, no city can do it in isolation. It has to do with coherent state and federal policy also. Thank you very much, and thank you for those that provided input.
I too want to thank those who called in and had public comment. I want to speak a little bit to the cold snap this weekend as well. I worked all weekend calling around to figure out if we could get access to the plethora of empty buildings all over our community. And, you know, I want to make it clear to the public that's watching that we know there are buildings out there that are underutilized. we are having trouble accessing them. We need those who own the buildings to be willing to partner with us in order to open the doors. We know the procedure to get Egan open or other contracted individuals and agencies that can help serve the public, but we need additional space available for them. So I am pleading with other governmental agencies, other commercial building owners, anybody who knows that they have large space available that's sprinkled, meaning has sprinklers in it. It has to have sprinklers in it that are operational in order to put people in there overnight, to please contact us. Let us know that you're willing to open those doors on freezing nights for people. We need to be able to give a message to those that are in need, that we know exactly where they can go when this occurs in plenty of time in order to prepare and staff and get them to a safe place. We need to know this in advance, but we need the community's help in order to open up those buildings. The county doesn't have all those buildings available. We were able to open the fairgrounds, and that was a good thing because we were able to house people who came, but it is at such short notice, we are unable to get the message out to those folks on the street that these services are available. So anybody that has space, contact the county. We want to work with you in order to make sure that we don't have anybody out on the streets on freezing nights. So if there's no other responses or remonstrance, we'll move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is the first item is our COVID-19 response and recovery. And we have Mr. Mokrzycki, our county administrator, and Karen Gaffney, our director of health and human services.
I'll turn it over to Karen to jump right into our update.
Thank you. And I am in the process of getting my screen shared. So one moment, please. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing what I am seeing. Good. Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Good morning, Chair Buck and members of the board. I want to give you a brief update and including addressing some of the questions that came up during public comment about testing, and then we'll make sure we save plenty of time for the board to ask any questions that you might have. We are still at a high alert status based on the data that we review each week, and some of that data I'll go through again and give you updates this morning as we click through. Overall, I would say it's important for the board and the community to know that during the course of the pandemic, we've now had 2,414 people confirmed for COVID who've been ill with COVID in our community. So we're almost to 2,500 people in Lane County. Currently, there are 202 people who are infectious. 9 of those people are in the hospital currently, and 27 people have passed due to COVID. So those are the overall numbers for the pandemic in the community. We also count how many people are in quarantine, people who are under monitoring, and those are the people we reach out to every day during their infectious period to check on symptoms, make sure they're doing okay, ask if they need anything to be able to maintain their quarantine. And as of yesterday, we had 708 people in Lane County who were under monitoring and getting those daily phone calls, either directly from Lane County or through our partnership with the University of Oregon. And we have 126 households in the community currently who do need case management services in order to maintain their quarantine or isolation. So those, again, can be anything from groceries delivered, because remember, when you're in quarantine or isolation, we really need you not to leave your home for that period of time. So people who don't have other natural supports, we are stepping up to help them with that, to make sure that they are accessing the benefits that they're entitled to, that they have a place where they can safely quarantine or isolate, and that they have groceries, diapers, other supplies needed to get them through that period of time. So that's the state of things in our community, and I think it's important for the public to know really just how widespread the impact is in our community. And while we talk about hospitalized numbers, as I said, we had 9 people, at least as of yesterday afternoon, who were in the hospital. Know that that's a point in time count. Our hospitals are every day admitting people and discharging other people. So the total number of people who've been hospitalized over the course of the pandemic is, of course, higher than this particular moment in time. And I think that's important also because it's one of our key indicators of serious disease in the community. So that data, along with everything else that I just reported, is available in real time on our website for anyone in the community to be able to track on. I also want to take just a moment before I go through my slides and talk a little bit about testing. I know we've had questions from the community, and there's questions in the media because there are many different types of tests that are happening for different purposes in the community. So the questions this morning were specifically around antigen tests, and those tests, there was a specific reference made to the testing that the University of Oregon and the Pac-12 are doing for football players and other athletes. So I want to be clear that some testing is done for screening purposes. And so that's, for example, what the Pac-12 is doing with the antigen tests that they have distributed to universities across the Pac-12. And so those screening tests are done frequently, and in the event that they come up with a positive, we would absolutely recommend that those are confirmed with PCR tests that are going to be more accurate. And so that, I would say, is standard operating procedure, and for when those tests are used in that screening way, particularly for asymptomatic people, which is what the athletes are, that those wouldn't be standalone results, but are used as screens. And I would say that we've had a longstanding practice in our community. For instance, Peace Health has used rapid tests for screening purposes like that, and they do confirmatory PCRs on those. So I think it's important for the public to know that different testing processes are used for different purposes, and that we are confirming on those tests. It's also important to know that as antigen tests are becoming more widely available in the community, some of you on the board, I know, have been tracking this, and some in the community, the federal government has made available to communities BinaxNOW, which is a particular type of antigen rapid test. Lane County received 5,000 of those as part of our allocation. And as the person in public comment noted, those are not recommended for people who are asymptomatic. And that's true. They're much more accurate with people who are symptomatic. So when Lane County is deploying where those tests go, we are deploying them to places where they can be used for people who are symptomatic. So we've shared those with busy primary care clinics, particularly those in rural areas where there's not easy access to testing. We've shared them with first responders, with, again, in the fire camps, places where they can be used with people who are symptomatic and where a rapid test result is important. So that, I just don't want anyone in the community to confuse those tests with what we do for diagnostic testing, which is the results that we're using with PCR testing, which is a much more accurate molecular test. So I hope that helps answer some of those questions that were raised during public comment. A couple other things. I just wanted to remind the community that also available on our website is this one-page summary, as well as a more in-depth summary of our strategy and plan for responding to COVID. And I'm happy to answer Any questions about any element of that plan? Because we have limited time this morning, I'm just going to lift up a few parts, but it's all game for questions and discussions as we move through this. This is a copy of our EpiCurve, which I know is quite familiar to the board by now, and is posted on our website and updated regularly. And this shows our disease as reflected on the day symptom onset begins in the community. So you can see we absolutely are experiencing a significant uptick in our cases, and that has continued. This is our testing volume, and again, our goal, as reflected in the line there initially for reopening, was to make sure that we're able to do at least 500 tests a day. And you can see with the data on the right to the graph that gives you the daily average for each week. We have been exceeding 1,500 tests a day for the last several weeks. And I would anticipate, again, that week of October 18th, those numbers will bump up as more of those test results come through and get logged. So we are doing a great job at testing in the community. And I know that our partners at McKinsey-Willamette and the University of Oregon have been bringing in additional equipment to enable our community to be able to do more testing, because we know we need to find those cases and use our isolation and quarantine. In my opening remarks, I talked some about case management, and I want to ask you to ignore that last data point. I wanted to be able to show the picture, and I realized this morning we didn't have the data yesterday, so that's why it drops off to 0. I wish that were really 0. It's not. We just didn't have data yesterday for the University of Oregon, which influenced that. But we're seeing a steady increase in the need for case management services, and that is, I think, a natural outcome of our increased spread of disease, and then also as we're seeing more disease move into households that really need that extra level of support. So our facility at River Avenue continues to be busy, and we've been very creative. Our staff, Elizabeth Miglioretto, I need to really tip my hat to her, working day and night to make sure that people have places where they can safely quarantine and isolate, and particularly when we have parents with children who need to quarantine, it's not really appropriate to do that at River Avenue. So we're being creative about where we can house those individuals in the community. And again, this increase in this graph is absolutely a result of our increased number of cases. So to the extent that we can successfully flatten the curve in our community, then we'll see these numbers go down as we see our overall case numbers go down. Governor's watch list. We've talked about that for the last several weeks, and here is our data, and we expect the data for this week. We usually get a preliminary poll on Tuesday, and then they'll do the final poll on Wednesday, process it through the governor's office, and then hear final results on Friday, publicly announced. I will tell you, I plan that we are going to be on the governor's watch list again with the data that they will pull this week. So you can see in this chart that they do a 2-week rolling poll, basically. So you can see for the last 2 weeks in this report from October 4th through 17th, our sporadic cases were at 71.8 per 100,000, which is clearly going in the wrong direction, and a symptom of our need both to get our overall case numbers down and also to really have individuals answer the call when we call, so that we can help get them traced to where they might have become infected. And then that's, once we connect the cases, then they come out of the sporadic case count. I do want to thank Commissioner Berney for his suggestion last week. Again, sometimes it's really simple, obvious things that that we don't notice when we're so far in the weeds. So we did take the opportunity to change our outgoing what's displayed on your phone when public health calls, so people know that it is public health. And we ask the community, please answer the call and help us out in being able to contain the spread. School reopening metrics are another key set of data that we track on. And again, as you can imagine from the last slide, given how high our numbers are, we also do not look good on our school reopening metrics. Of particular concern to me is our test positivity rate that was at 7.2% when this data was pulled. That's the number that we really need to get down below 5% to feel like we're doing enough testing, quite frankly. So we'll continue to drive that testing number up. And then ultimately that we're decreasing the level of disease in the community. You can see on the good news front, our cases per 100,000 as listed in that middle column have dropped the last couple weeks. So that is good. And we want to continue to see that trend moving forward. We still have a long ways to go though, before our schools will be able to open. As a reminder to the community, there was just one week here where we were below the 10 cases per 100,000 threshold, and that was back in August. So we really need to get our numbers back down to that level. What I can say is we have been there before, so I know that we can get those numbers down. It's just going to take a concerted community effort to get there. Finally, in the indicators column, the Health Authority also issues weekly metrics for every county in the state. And this is the last update that we have from the Health Authority. Again, we expect new numbers typically will come out tomorrow for the week prior. Shows we did have a decrease in new cases in the last 7 days, which matches with what I showed you on the prior slide. And we were at 91% of our cases with follow-up within 24 hours. And again, our target there is 95%. So I know our staff is working hard to get back up to that threshold level. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention on the slide about the governor's watch list, it does appear that Multnomah County is being added to the governor's watch list. So I think that's an indicator statewide too of just the significant increase in cases in our state. So not just in Lane County, but our state and nationally too, as we look at the data that comes in. And I know we've talked, I mean, there's just a lot of numbers in all of this. I think what I would say in terms of bottom line, I've said all along, we're going to have COVID in our community until we get an effective vaccine. So our goal here is ultimately to be able to protect our hospitals. We have to be able to make sure that our hospitals are not overrun so that people in our community who need care can get care. And we need to be able to get our schools open again. So those are the two incentives, I think, that I would put out for the community of why it's so important to take these measures is we need to protect our hospitals and we need to get our schools open. And then our last slide, I just wanted to share with you a few pictures. I know we've talked a lot about communications and some of these you may have already seen on your own feed. You know, there was a question during public comment about why are we encouraging masking? And I have to tell you, our tools are limited about what will help contain the spread of disease. And masks are a critical piece of our toolbox for that. And so we've engaged a whole host of community partners in helping spread that message. As we've talked at past board meetings, our strategy really is to ask our partners to make these messages their own. So it's not just Lane County Public Health asking for this behavior, but it really is the whole community that's speaking out about why it's important. So just a few pictures that I grabbed to post are clearly University of Oregon and some of the work they've been doing. I also lifted up a post from Lane Transit District I could have just as easily picked some up from the city of Eugene or the city of Springfield, other entities who are sharing with the community the importance of masking and other important COVID messages. I also want to lift up just a couple unique ideas, again, to look at that community engagement piece. The city of Eugene has decided to launch a youth messaging campaign and contest. I know many of you, and I'm looking at Commissioner Burney because I remember you in particular talking about what we do for positive youth development and youth engagement and really thinking about the power of peers. So that particular campaign is tapping into young people to develop those messages that are meaningful in those populations, and then providing prizes and incentives and recognition around those efforts. So you'll be hearing more about that from the city of Eugene. Our team with the business community, our chambers across the county, LTD, continues to work individually and collectively at pushing messages out that are specifically developed by and targeted for those communities. Again, I would say if we want to keep our businesses open, then we need to mask up, wash our hands, and stay physically distanced. That's how we keep our businesses open. And then finally, over in the far corner is a picture of Dr. Ludke that happens to be from the beginning of his public service announcement. Many of you may have seen that on television, on YouTube, on your social media feeds and other places. And this last week on Friday, he also launched the inaugural radio call-in show on KLCC on Friday afternoons that's focused on COVID and also a great opportunity to get questions answered by Dr. Ludke. So I think I'm going to stop there and invite you to ask whatever questions or talk about what you think is most important as we move forward.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Very little question, Ms. Gaffney, between our website and your presentations and your regular, almost daily communications. You leave few questions unanswered on a regular basis, so thank you for that. I just wanted to point out that every single time I hear Dr. Ludke talk, I feel reassured. I guess it's what a doctor would call a bedside manner, but his ability to communicate with people on issues that are very important to them. He comes across, because he is trustworthy, he's accurate, he's calm, and he does not hesitate to say what is the truth. And I've not listened to the radio show yet, but I will be listening this Friday, and I'm confident that when Dr. Ludke talks, people really do listen. So could you pass that along to Dr. Ludke if he's not listening right now, that his bedside manner is most appreciated, and the more we can get it out in the community, the better off everybody's going to feel, I do believe. Thank you, Ms. Gaffney.
Chair Buck and Commissioner Farr, I could not agree more. I think our community is very blessed to have Dr. Ludke as our Senior Health Officer, and I will absolutely pass that along.
Any other questions or comments for today? Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I would request that comment about Dr. Ludke go both ways. In addition to you passing that on, and I completely agree with Commissioner Farr, could you possibly have create something that we then, all of us as commissioners, if we choose to, but I would hope, can post on our social media, directing traffic to that program? Because I think that personal give and take, knowing when they can ask the doctor a question without being charged doctor rates, things of that nature. I think that would be reassuring on a more generalized level as we move through these uncharted waters. So that's just a suggestion. I know I would get it out there to the maximum degree that I could, because I do think it's good for people to know they can ask the doctor questions that are on their mind. It seems to me, Karen, when you talk about toolkit, other than the infrastructure, the contact tracing, the testing, the things we can do, it seems that you're referring to human behavior. I mean, that's all, it feels like that's all we have right now. Tell me if I'm incorrect, because and tell me what you see moving forward over the next month or 2 months. No one's going to hold you to it, but I mean, you're looking at this data until I'm sure you're exhausted daily. What do you see happening? Because I know the national news, I know what I'm hearing, but what do you see happening in Lane County? And do you think that's a good idea? And do you think you can get back on the Dr. Ledke kind of messaging that we can get out? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Buck, Vice Chair Berney. I absolutely think we can get some posts that would point people to the KLCC show, and I will talk to Jason about that. In terms of where we're going in our community, I think that we certainly, yes, human behavior is what we're about trying to change at this point. And I think that in a lot of ways, we're at one of those inflection points. And I know in the same way, the state of Oregon has modeling that, you know, has a couple different scenarios, and it all depends on what the choices are that people make in our community. I believe that, you know, on this particular slide, one of the slides is our Mask Up campaign that has, it's actually been lovely to watch some of the tide turning where people who tend to be more quiet in the community are finding their voice in being able to say why it's important to them that they mask up and encourage people in their orbits to mask up. So my sense is that the message is starting to be heard in the community. And as you know, it always takes a few weeks for us to see those shifts in the data itself. So I'm hopeful that we are moving in a positive direction where we can get people's attention. We know that there are hazards moving into the cold weather and for COVID in particular. That's aside from the housing and homelessness issue that I know is also important. But for one of our defenses thus far has been for people to be outside, and that if it's less dangerous to be outside, and now as it's getting cold and people are moving indoors, the risk of transmission certainly is greater if we have people who aren't willing to wear masks. So it could go badly. I am someone who tends to be an optimist, and I'm hoping that we are capturing the attention of the community in a way that really pulls people back toward community. In my conversations, it seems like that's one of the delineating points is, do people understand that there's an obligation for us to care about each other and live in community, as opposed to wanting to be able to do what they want to do right now. So I'm hopeful that as human beings, we do want to live in community and support community and care about each other, even if that means that this year I might not have a holiday gathering in my home around a table, which is what I have done my whole life. And so this is the year to try something different, try something new. And it doesn't mean it has to be this way always. We're not giving it up forever. This will end. But for right now, this is what we need people to do, is to make that sacrifice in whatever that means in their individual life, so that we can protect each other, our community, our hospitals. We see what's happening in other communities where hospitals are overrun, and we can't have that for our community. That's not who we are. That's not what we need. So I'm hopeful that we will flatten the curve, and it will be with us, but at that lower level until we can get a vaccine in the community. Sorry, that was a long answer, Commissioner Berney.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Ms. Gaffney. Appreciate the update. We'll move on to our holiday farm fire update. And with us will be Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director.
Good morning, Chair Buck. Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for having me here for an update today. I have Austin Ramirez with me today. A lot of your questions last time were with regard to housing, so I wanted to bring him to you so that we could provide a more detailed update. Austin has been coordinating all the details and trying to prepare plans for disaster housing. So I'll just give a few updates and then I'll pass to Austin. So on our social services side, we've continued to support folks at the Lane Event Center. Lucy Zamarilli has been staffing that daily and will be with a few runs upriver. We're going to be discontinuing that as our numbers have dwindled there, and FEMA will be shutting down their external outreach center there at the end of the month. We're going to have our last day there Wednesday, and Lucy will start moving upriver at least 2 days a week. She's planning to do Thursdays in Leesburg and Fridays in the upper McKenzie Valley. On the disaster housing side, Austin will talk more details on what are the short and kind of medium to long-term range plans. But I wanted to talk about the emergency sheltering just a little bit with Red Cross and their efforts in sheltering people in hotels. There's been a lot of activity on this front over the last few days between Red Cross and staff. We've had a lot of concerns as Red Cross has indicated that they are exiting people out of hotel sheltering for people that they didn't feel were eligible anymore. So there were 2 lists of people that they were moving to exit, and they did that on Monday, as far as we know. The first list was for households where there was no visible damage, according to their records. We did have staff go upriver and found that there were at least 7 or 8 major discrepancies on that list of properties that were supplied to us. And then the second list was for people that had missing or incomplete addresses and had not been in contact with Red Cross at their request. So as far as we know, those lists of people were discontinued from hotels yesterday morning. We were not able to get any contact information for Red Cross's clients. They won't supply that to us. So we prepared flyers. Laurel O'Rourke has been working this issue on case management, trying to help people. She distributed flyers to 12 different hotels where people were being displaced or exited out of the hotels, and encouraged them to contact her if they are being exited into homelessness. And as of yesterday afternoon, I was aware of that 3 people had contacted her. So she'll be working those issues. We're not sure how big of an issue this will be yesterday, but we were very concerned, not knowing the real true status of these individuals. The debris management effort is moving along now. We had EPA arriving on Sunday, and they're beginning their work to do the hazardous waste removal on properties where property owners have signed a right of entry agreement. So there were 440 people that have signed agreements. EPA will be working through that hazardous waste cleanup effort over the next couple weeks, and then eventually we'll get to the larger cleanup of remaining debris, but we still don't know what that looks like or a timeline yet. It's looking like that will be a state-led effort with coordination from the county. EWEB is moving ahead with a lot of different actions around watershed, again, pulling hazardous waste back and working with landowners to provide soil stabilization, erosion control. They have an ambassador up at the old fish hatchery by Leesburg, who's there 2 days a week to connect with property owners and try to supply resources. They've been using the Northwest Youth Corps and other entities to provide that service. And I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have Austin here. And so I'll leave it there and pass to Austin, and then we'll leave some time for your questions. Austin?
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. First of all, I just want to recognize Laurel O'Rourke for the work she's been doing since the beginning of this. She's worked day and night to literally save people from becoming homeless, and we are incredibly lucky to have her here at the county. That being said, I did want to provide you with a significant update on our disaster housing efforts. So I've got quite a bit of information, and then I'm happy to take any questions. I do want to start with how we define disaster housing. As housing is a broad term and can apply to multiple situations. For us right now, disaster housing is temporary and transitional in nature, with a focus on serving our most vulnerable populations in the McKenzie right now, which are people who were unhoused pre-fire or those who rented or owned in the McKenzie area pre-fire, but do not have the resources or means to secure shelter at this time. So what disaster housing looks like, there are several options we are pursuing at this time. One that has been able to provide immediate relief for folks who need to be upriver for personal or employment reasons is working with Oregon DHS to contract with facilities in the McKenzie area to provide non-congregate shelter to community members. This includes not just lodges or hotels and motels, but also several types of facilities upriver, like short-term rentals, like the U.S. Basketball Academy. And this does not involve the Red Cross. So this is DHS directly contracting with these facilities upriver, many of whom have already been providing shelter free of charge to people since the fire. So this also provides retroactive funding to make sure it's sustainable for these facilities. The second disaster housing option, we obviously know that there's not enough existing inventory of properties or facilities in Lane County, let alone the McKenzie, to take in the large number of displaced community members. So we are vetting and exploring options that would provide additional temporary inventory, such as modular emergency shelter units and tiny homes. The main challenge with these two options are finding structures that are safe and could withstand winter in the McKenzie. So while we continue to explore ready to buy options, and there are a few that have looked favorable, we are also engaging with a local group of engineers, architects, and builders to explore creating built to spec options that would meet building and safety needs over the winter. And we ultimately would hope that these could be designed and purchased in a way that allows us to use them for our broader needs and strategies regarding the unhoused. Ultimately, once we find modular units or tiny homes or anything that can provide shelter, we need land and sites. So that is the third disaster housing path we're taking. There are several options in this category up the McKenzie area. So under House Bill 4212, which allows for supersiting of emergency shelters on rural residential properties, we were able to quickly work with two property owners upriver, Lazy Days RV Park and the Living Waters Church, to submit two HB 4212 applications before it expired last month. So these applications have been approved, and we continue to work with those property owners on exploring their sites as emergency shelter. Both properties were severely impacted by the fire, and the status of the current infrastructure is unknown, but likely damaged. So both of those sites, before we put shelter on them, will require significant cleanup and repair, which is ongoing. We have also identified Camp Christian, a large property currently for sale located on Deerhorn, as possible shelter site that would meet our short-term and long-term needs. So it's one Sarai Johnson and I are incredibly interested in. Staff have toured the site, and while there are concerns regarding the existing structures, the power, water, and septic infrastructure in place was not damaged and is designed to meet the needs of 150 to 200 people. There are also large, flat, open gravel areas that could accommodate non-congregate shelter through the placement of RVs, tiny homes, or modular units. So we continue to vet this site and are working with the state on a potential funding option. Right now, Business Oregon has a community development block grant program, CDBG program, that could provide a significant amount of funding for that. We've also engaged with the National Forest staff to explore the use of their campgrounds in the McKenzie area. These sites look to be good options for placing non-congregate shelter. However, they are typically closed over the winter, and their existing water, septic, and power infrastructure is not winterized. So we are concerned that it may need new infrastructure or would not be a safe option. And then one thing Lane County's done that has been critical for folks is the emergency RV permit for those who have been able to access RVs, trailers, and have a property to put them on upriver. And the City of Springfield's temporary rules on locating shelter are another critical tool for many people who may not be able to make it up to McKenzie, but are using Springfield as sort of the next closest option. So we were really excited to see them do that. And it's temporary rules that we'll be engaging with our other cities on throughout Lane County to see if they could adopt as well. We know realistically people have been displaced across the county. They're not just in Springfield, they're not just in McKenzie. There are also some additional resources pending that may support our efforts. Late last week, LCDC and DLCD adopted temporary emergency housing rules in response to fires throughout the state. Planning staff and county council are currently analyzing these rule changes to see how that impacts our efforts in Lane County. As you know, land use in Oregon is often a significant barrier to housing or development in general. So we are hopeful that this will facilitate additional housing options. The recent emergency board meeting has resulted in funding that could support our efforts. However, we were disappointed to see the lack of flexibility. So Project Turnkey, which is probably the most talked about, provides $30 million to Oregon Community Foundation for the purchase of hotels or motels. There are currently no hotels or motels in Lane County that we are aware of that would be applicable for our needs in this case, despite really valiant efforts from Senator Manning and Representative Holvey to adjust the language of the motion to include facilities like Camp Christian, which we are exploring. The motion was not changed, so that was disappointing. OHCS will also receive $10 million for provision of shelter and other services for wildfire impacted communities. However, this funding has not been deployed or programmed yet, and there's no information currently available on how that will happen, but we are ready to apply for funding immediately once it becomes available and programmed. The last thing I want to mention is the FEMA direct housing assistance, which Lane County has not been approved for yet. Should we be approved, this will provide a menu of options from FEMA. It begins with an analysis of available inventory, including things that may not be visible to the current market, like secondary homes or short-term rentals, and then matching these options with those displaced from the fire. FEMA then covers the expenses through direct leasing with property owners. We know the issue with available inventory in Lane County, so I don't think that solved the problem, but it'd be good to get another set of eyes on it. After that, FEMA then moves into a multifamily lease and repair program, which identifies multifamily properties that are in need of repair in order to house individuals. So FEMA enters into contracts with property owners to perform the repairs and then do a direct lease. I do appreciate that option because it feels like something that would provide inventory in the long term after displaced individuals are using it. And then the final option ultimately that FEMA does, and this is the option of last resort, is leasing trailers and mass shelter sites. So that typical FEMA trailer image that's notorious, it's not one they want to do. It's not typically one communities want to go with. So that really is the option of last resort. Ultimately, if we're not approved for this FEMA direct housing assistance, we are still going to pursue all the options we can, many of which are included in that FEMA assistance. So if we don't get it, and I really hope we do, I would say our housing efforts don't stop. We've already started a lot of the things they would do. So ultimately, if we are approved, it would only catalyze the effort. We are providing a letter through our emergency manager to the state and FEMA to request a status update on our request for FEMA housing assistance. So I'm hopeful that will provide either an approval or tell us what we need to do to get approval. And then ultimately, we are working closely with Sarai Johnson and other partners to ensure that our short-term solutions can be leveraged into long-term solutions and meet future needs. So we are working closely with her. That's my update. I know there was a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and I'm anxious to hear other commissioners' questions and comments, but I'll wedge a few in myself first. And Mr. Hurley, I'm going to direct this to you, but I know Austin is listening. You have assembled around you a team of truly responsive stars who are really stepping up to and doing things that many of us could not even envision that they would do. Austin mentioned Laurel O'Rourke. I've talked to Laurel several times, and she is tireless. Lucy Zamorelli, you mentioned, is working a couple of days up the river, and Lucy is also at the same time the chief staff person for the Mental Health Advisory Committee. Lucy is one of your superstars. And of course, Sarai, who everybody mentions all the time, the work that Sarai is doing. So I'm going to direct my comments, Chair Buck, now more to Mr. Ramirez. Austin, you and I talked ever so briefly in the hallway the other day, and it seems like you heard every word I said, either that or you were thinking about it even before I said it. So I'm not going to take credit for what you're doing, but man alive, I think you are you're hitting on all cylinders right now in terms of the things that we can possibly do. We've turned up the volume significantly on housing as a result of the Holiday Farm fire. Unfortunate, but you said that many of the things that we're doing can be used for our county-wide housing issue. And I really would like to point that out, that some of the innovative ways that we are taking care of emergency, transitional, and ultimately permanent housing can be transformed and used county-wide. We're establishing models right now that we can use for years and years to come. And I'd like to speak specifically about emergency, transitional, and permanent housing. Finding ways to allow innovative types of housing is on your front burner. I know that, Austin. And there are things that we need to do to overcome objections and conditions that may currently exist either in law, in code, whatever it may be. And I know that you're overturning every single stone to make that happen. So I'm not going to try to turn up the heat or volume on that, Austin, because I know that you're doing it. But that being said, you talk about the FEMA trailers, which nobody wants to go to that. And we do know that there's a very broad pipeline available of homes on wheels. Not very many in Oregon, but some from out of state. And you and I have talked about that a little bit, that those homes on wheels can be here in relatively short notice. And what's really interesting about them is they can provide all three types of housing that we're interested in: the emergency, the transitional, and ultimately even permanent housing with the same footprint, the same unit. And if the permanent housing is not the home on wheels that provides the emergency and transitional, then it can be moved to another part of Lane County and used there. Finding ways to be innovative, to get around, to address the conditions and concerns that people have, and then parlay it into future action. Austin, I am so pleased that you're on the job. You are the right person at the right time in the right place. Mr. Hurley, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to hear what other commissioners have to say first. And if you miss something that's on my list, I'll come back. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner Sorensen.
I know we're having a work session on the impact of the Holiday Farm fire, and that work session, I believe, is scheduled for the day after the election next Wednesday, I guess 8 days from now. And I'm wondering, Mr. Ramirez, have you encountered any regulatory barriers in helping people acquire housing where they haven't had it? Because I think that'll be the focus of our work session a week from Wednesday.
We have.
Could you
ultimately, it's typically land use and zoning.
Yeah.
The recent DLCD changes, we're really hoping help facilitate an easier and quicker path forward. And I know Keir will discuss that in greater detail at the upcoming work session. They're still analyzing what those changes look like.
Could you give us a paragraph or two out of your own memory or knowledge about what the state has done and what and how that's made it easier for you to help people?
Well, so I think broadly, there are very few zoning categories that allow for mass shelter sites, even non-congregate options. So any sort of current zoning would most likely require a typical land use process, which best case scenario is 60 days. And that requires a complete application from the start, as well as no appeals, which could happen. We've already been told that different groups are watching to see what happens. So we're hoping that we want to do this in the right way, but we do need a better path forward, because in 60 days, it's too late. So we are hoping that the DLCD changes and ultimately the innovative and creative work land management are pursuing right now allow for a quicker process.
Is it possible in the time between now and next Wednesday, you and Mr. Miller could learn what other communities are doing to reconcile the state land use law that emphasizes a right for people to be informed when the government takes land use decisions, reconciling that against the speed with which communities want to help people who have lost their homes. Can you do that for us?
I'm happy to connect with Kier and discuss that. I will say from talking to our peers at the emergency management level, it does sound like Lane County is moving quicker than other counties. And I don't say that in a way to brag about it, but it does feel like, you know, nobody else has used House Bill 4212 to secure properties in rural areas. Nobody else has done the amount of vetting we have. So while I hope there are other solutions that the other counties have discovered, it does feel like people are looking to Lane County to do that for them.
Finally, are you encountering any difficulty in helping people get housing with regard to Lane County's existing floodway and floodplain ordinance? Is it stopping people from doing something they want to do?
That has not elevated to my attention. So it doesn't mean it's not out there, it's not happening. I just am not aware of it at this point.
Yeah, that will be the focus of the Wednesday meeting. At least several people, commissioners, will be asking questions about whether the existing floodway and floodplain ordinance would prevent people from rebuilding their homes. Thanks a lot.
Commissioner Berney.
I just want to say thank you, Austin and Dan and everyone. I know that this is the moment in 60-hour weeks where you're not scrambling and working, but you're sharing. And so it's our opportunity to say thank you. Austin, I've really noticed it. If this is possible, an increase in your productivity and your insights ever since you become a Springfield resident. So I'm delighted that that osmosis is occurring. I have a couple of specific questions though. One is, you talked about a significant amount of CDBG dollars as it relates to this effort. What is a significant amount that you are hoping for that in fact can be allocated from that to this?
The maximum amount of funding from this program is $500,000. The Camp Christian property is currently listed for 1.5 million. So Sarai and myself and John Brown, the broker we've been working with, are continuing to explore that. Because the structures are in poor condition, we're unsure of how realistic that price is. Obviously that CDBG grant, if we pursue it and obtain it, wouldn't cover the full cost, which is why we were hoping some of the emergency board programs would be more flexible.
Perfect. Does this at all intersect with House Bill 4212 you were mentioning in terms of financing?
This property does not. It does not have the zoning that would have made it eligible for 4212.
Okay, thank you. Within the FEMA resources, do you have an amount, or do you even know it, that we're hoping or asking them for, or is it not that type of thing?
It's there is a financial component, but it's more of the services that they would provide that I mentioned. Correct.
Do you know if any of those services allow for retrofitting commercial space that's vacant into housing?
What they've told us is that any properties they use would have to meet current code and shelter requirements. So unless there were changes by DLCD, commercial properties likely wouldn't be used as shelter housing sites.
And forgive the naivete. I'm being nice to myself. It might be stupidity, but forgive the naivete of this question. But do the county commissioners in county jurisdiction have the ability to waive or change zoning to accommodate an emergency like this? And would that suffice for FEMA to be eligible to create housing under those circumstances?
I'd have to defer to Dan or our land management staff or even county council. I'm just not familiar with those particulars, unfortunately.
Okay. Dan, do you want me just to keep?
And I'm not an expert in that area. I would probably want to defer to Kier when we had that conversation on the 4th. I know it's possible to change zoning, but it's quite a process to go through.
I understand, but I'm just hoping that maybe under this emergency ordinance we're operating in, that there might be some speed and efficiency as it relates to serving such a dire public need, but I don't know. So thank you for looking into that. And then finally, I've mentioned to a couple of people, including Mr. Mokraheisky, does HB 4212, $30 million, that doesn't sound like a lot of money to me for an entire state when a project I'm looking at is going to be costing more than 30 million. But is that something that counties or municipalities are going to compete for vis-a-vis putting in applications? And if so, would a property in Cottage Grove, not the one you're thinking, would a property in Cottage Grove that's on the market now and has, I believe, 62 units be useful, or is that too far away as it relates to this situation?
Just to clarify, Commissioner Berney, HB 4212 was the super siting. The $30 million is from Project Turnkey, which
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
To answer your question, I don't believe that property would fit our current needs for a shelter site. We've explored it, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be a fit.
Okay, I don't know if we're talking the same property, but thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And if we're not, I'll circle around with you. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? I'll add, Commissioner Farr.
Chair Buckeye, I do, but I prefer to listen to you first, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll just add a few thoughts and we can do another round. So I want to thank staff who worked all weekend long on the Red Cross letter that was sent to folks last week. I know that was completely unexpected. And I sent a letter to Red Cross yesterday expressing our frustration and our desire to mend some communication and operational gaps we have with them. We were not the only county that had folks receive a letter from Red Cross on a Friday morning, expecting folks to leave the hotels on Monday morning without some due diligence. So I had a conversation with the head of the Oregon Red Cross, and we should be having some meetings internally and invite them to speak to the board as well. We have a strong desire to want to make sure we're all on the same page with how they operate and how they work through disasters, as we know that this is the first of this size that we're dealing with. In this way, through OEM and FEMA and Red Cross. So I know that letter really had a lot of extra impact on our staff, and appreciate you all working on that all weekend long. This weekend, I went up and visited some wildfire victims on their property, and it's just a reminder to our board that we do have employees that lost everything up there. And they're working every day for us while they're also trying to navigate recovery for themselves and living in temporary shelter situations or with friends or at the hotels. It's a lot to handle, on top of also trying to make sure that their kids are doing their online schooling and navigating COVID. And I just appreciate their sheer grit to get through everything that they're doing just in order to survive. It's devastating for them. And just a reminder of why we're doing all of our work in order to help every single person that was affected by the wildfire. I was incredibly disappointed on Friday that the e-board did not include any flexibility for us to search for other types of sources of housing for wildfire evacuees. It really felt like they left Lane County out of the whole state funding cycle. And that's so disappointing. And hopefully we can continue to work with them in order to let them know that hotels and motels are not the only kind of housing that is out there. As somebody who worked on manufactured housing for a long time, a lot of people never thought manufactured housing was in anywhere close to a category of stick-built housing, but it is just as viable as anything else. And so are pads for fifth wheels and trailers that can help wildfire evacuees. Also incredibly disappointed that they were not able to come together to approve the additional funding for housing and homelessness in general across the state, excuse me. Hopefully that will come back and we'll be able to utilize that for our winter housing needs in general. I'm crossing my fingers that will come back. Those are the main comments I wanted to share today. I continue to field calls and emails from wildfire victims, as well as calling all around trying to find additional shelters just for a cold snap this weekend. I know that each of us works 7 days a week, long hours, and I appreciate all the commissioners' help that you've been providing to our community. Commissioner Farr. We need your audio.
Thanks, Chair Buck. And you covered the e-board action on Friday, which was something I was going to comment on. What we witnessed on Friday, and we often witness it, is when somebody has a particular effectiveness at convincing other people in the legislature that their way is the right way, then they can change the entire direction of what could be good legislation. Not necessarily good legislation either, but and if you're in favor, if you believe in what they're arguing for, then you love that person. And if you're against it, then you think, well, why does that person have so much sway? On Friday, both Representative Holvey and Senator Manning were champions for Lane County. They stepped up and they stepped to the mic and they did every single thing that they could to help us out. And we were disappointed in the ultimate result in the turnkey project, but as you have said, Chair Buck, we need to continue to push back on that. And Lane County's been kind of shunned, kind of rejected, kind of shoved into the background. Really, as we move forward, we have things that we can do in Lane County that really are innovative, that are going to be ahead of the rest of the state. And I'm looking at Austin as I say that. So I talk about conditions and concerns. When people have concerns, it's usually a question that we can answer. If there's a condition, that means that with the existing set of rules, it's impossible. So that's when we need to look at the existing set of rules. And that's what we need to do with the legislature. And we need to do as much as we can, Austin, to find ways to answer Commissioner Bernie's question, for instance. Can Lane County commissioners overturn or overrule zoning issues? Well, no, really they can't. But if there's a way to do it, if there's an avenue, that's what we need to approach at this point in time. Chair Buck, thank you for that additional time.
Any other comments, questions?
Actually, Chair Buck, I'm sorry, I did have a question, and that was just a clarification, Mr. Ramirez. The Red Cross, the folks who have lost their temporary housing from Red Cross, or did I hear you say that we don't have access to a list of the names of people who've lost their housing? Is that correct?
That's correct. Red Cross will not provide that information on their clients.
And that's for privacy needs, even though the needs sometimes may supersede privacy. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the update. And we will move on with our agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Berney, second by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We lost. Somebody's on audio that probably needs to be on mute. We had 3 ayes and Commissioner Bozovich is excused, and I'm not sure where Commissioner Sorensen went. So It passes. We will move on to item 7A, the sheriff's discussion and report back on the contract with WellPath. I believe we have Sheriff Harold and Captain Riley.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Good morning, Commissioners. A little over a year ago, the Sheriff's Office asked the board to consider extending our contract with WellPath, our medical provider at the jail. And at that time, the board did do that and then asked us to come back in about a year to report back just on how that relationship is continuing to go. Of course, at the time, we didn't know that we were going to have a pandemic. So a lot has changed since a year ago when the board asked us to come back. But I'll tell you, and I'm only going to make a couple comments and then let Clint Riley, who is in the day-to-day relationship with WellPath, speak to it. But from my perspective, I've just been really pleased with the partnership with WellPath as we went through a pandemic and just really robust complications that brings to operating a corrections facility. WellPath as an organization was hosting weekly webinars and connecting with us on a regular basis on best practices, particularly when this was very new. And so in addition to consulting with our friends across the state from the Oregon State Sheriff's Association and frequent consultation with Lane County Public Health, WellPath was a really good partner in that as well. And with that, I will turn this over to Captain Clint Riley.
Good morning, Commissioners. An overview on WellPath. WellPath continues to be a valuable partner here at the Lane County Jail. Their company consistently demonstrates willingness to adapt to the changing needs and services at both the notion of current best practices and at the request of us, the Sheriff's Office. WellPath has earned the confidence of the Sheriff's Office staff and as a provider and partner in meeting our inmate needs here at the jail. Since contracting with WellPath, the Lane County Jail has progressively worked to establish specific care services to better benefit and address medical and mental health concerns of the inmate population. One thing we've added over the last couple of years is WellPath assigns a registered nurse to the jail intake area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This position is vital to the safety of everybody. With the rising number of medical issues we're seeing in jails, as well as ongoing mental health challenges, this position has proven to be absolutely necessary. WellPath nurses conduct intake screenings to ensure individuals can safely transition from police custody into jail custody. WellPath has been a valued partner during the COVID pandemic. They've helped us every step of the way. They quickly adapted to the changing environment COVID presented to all of us. We have partnered with WellPath and Lane County Health and Human Services to offer COVID tests to all custodies booking into the Lane County Jail. WellPath works closely with public health on test results and safely releasing folks back into the community. Even though we reduced the inmate population in the jail, WellPath's workload has not decreased. When an inmate enters the jail, they are monitored closely for 14 days for COVID. These observations vary depending on the circumstances. Ensuring inmates are separated and medically cared for during this time is crucial. Nearly half of the inmate population is currently in this status. Their support and continued dedication to the Sheriff's Office has been evident and appreciated in these most difficult of times. Collaboration continues with mental health services provided within the jail. Programming continues as well as triaging the large number of inmates booked into our facility that are in mental health crisis. This partnership benefits the inmate population, the jail facility, and other county service programs provided for this segment of population while they're in custody and once they're released back into our community. WellPath continues to provide a part-time psychiatrist in the facility and are always working at next steps providing mental health services to those in our jail. Significant collaborative partnerships and working relationships have been established with community partners and stakeholders. These partnerships and relationships have been positively fostered through time and demonstration of WellPath's practices. These working partnerships have substantially increased the continuity of care for those participating in county programs and services both outside and within the jail. Examples of this are evidenced through Lane County Public Health, Lane County Behavioral Health, as well as through municipal and state courts operating within Lane County. This continuity of care is facilitated in large because of WellPath's corporate policies and practices, allowing and encouraging facilitation. WellPath continues to provide quarterly meetings to the Sheriff's Office and invites a wide range of partners from the community. Information, data, stats, and current trends are presented and discussed amongst this group. WellPath continues to create critical relationships with outside key partners, local hospitals, Oregon State Hospital, various departments within Lane County Health and Human Services. This is beneficial in providing continued care for individuals within the jail, as well as once they're released back into the community. In addition to external collaboration and partnerships, WellPath has demonstrated a high degree of effectiveness at building and maintaining partnerships internally between jail staff and contracted WellPath staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from commissioners? I don't see any. It sounds like it's going well. That's good.
Things are going well.
Great.
Yes. You had mentioned, Chair Buck, last week you wanted a little bit more of the COVID overview. I could go into that a little bit if you'd like me to.
Sure, please.
So we have the ability to provide COVID tests to the inmates that book into our jail starting back in May. So since May, we're approaching 3,400 COVID tests of those folks that have booked into our jail. And so when they're screened and booked in, they're offered the ability to take a COVID test if they would like. And if they don't wish to take one, then they're quarantined. I know I've mentioned to this group before, but I think it's good to point out most folks that come to jail are released within 24 to 48 hours, and few stay beyond 72 hours. So the folks that are booking in and out of our jail are coming through, and if they're getting COVID tested, oftentimes they're released before those tests come back. So we have worked really well with Public Health and WellPath to maintain that continuity of information for those that come back with a positive test, and they're able to get that information back to Public Health. So the collaborative efforts there is working really well. The COVID tests, or the positives that we've seen come through the jail, have all been at our initial intake screening. And most of them have been of the asymptomatic variety that are booking in. So if it wasn't for the screening process we have at book in, a lot of these folks would come in not showing signs or symptoms and come in and out of the jail. So with the policies and procedures and the separation practices we put in place of really slowing things down and the testing process, I really feel the jail's really effectively handling COVID and really safe right now.
Wonderful.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Yeah.
Chair Buck, Captain Riley and Sheriff. Do I have the floor, Chair Buck? Thank you. Just ever so briefly, I just want to mention, aside from COVID, that both of you regularly attend the mental health summit meetings, which are attended by psychiatrists, caregivers, judges, public safety officials. And we all know that the Lane County Jail continues to receive a staggering number of people who are suffering from behavioral health disorders that come to your intake, and you house them in the jail. And I know that WellPath has been a good partner in behavioral health. Can you talk a little bit about their partnership in our behavioral health issues? And significantly, Chair Buck, I would like at some point in the future to have a presentation from Captain Riley and from Sheriff Harold regarding our efforts toward accommodating, helping, and treating the people who are suffering from behavioral health disorders who are housed in the jail. Captain Riley, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, we've continued, once COVID's obviously impacted all of us and taken a tremendous amount of time away from what we've been normally working on, but we have not stopped on our dedication to mental health and working with the Mental Health Summit. We actually got 2 grants here recently, the Impacts Grant, which is also continuing down the road of working with the Mental Health Summit. And we got a medically assisted therapy grant to start with that in the jail as well. So we kept full steam ahead on both of those projects during COVID, and we're able to get those grants. Yeah, we continue to look at majority of the folks that book into our jail, 60 to 70% of them suffer from a mental health disorder of some sort. I would say closer to 90% suffer from addiction issues of some sort, drugs or alcohol, and many it's a combination of both. Right now, we're seeing probably 25 folks booked into our jail every day and 25 folks released. So you can imagine the volume of folks that are coming through our jail as we're still providing mental health screening, medical screening, and then adding in COVID. During times, those numbers would probably be closer to 35 to 40 in non-COVID times that in and out every day in our jail. So that's a large number of folks. You're talking close to 1,000 people come in and out of this building every day, and most stay less than 3 days. And many of those folks are repeat folks coming in and out of our facility throughout the month. And so a lot of those folks suffer from mental health disorders, and you could talk to Eugene Police, Springfield Police, Cahoots, the ERs. It's the same folks cycling through all of our facilities.
Thank you, Captain Riley and Sheriff Harold. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, I think you are our largest mental health facility at the moment, unfortunately. I was also going to ask about the grants, so thank you for bringing that up. I know that that is going to be really helpful in order to work through how we operate at the jail and through the sheriff's office with the mental health aspect. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I simply want to make the comment that I appreciate and respect something that Sheriff Harold has shared with me when there was all this discussion about police bias, et cetera, and integrating social services with law enforcement, that in a sense, that's what Lane County is already, that's where we're at. And your commitment to the humanity of people, the mental health of those of suffering, as well as obviously the responsibilities of jailing them, from what I can tell, is to be commended. And I thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your work. Thank you so much for what you do and for the update.
Okay. Thanks for having us today.
We'll move on to County Council's announcements.
I have no announcements, Chair.
I have a question under this item. Was there any update to the campaign finance reform litigation that was going for Multnomah County, or is that, or do we not have an update yet?
No, we don't have an update. The oral argument got, the case was remanded to the trial court in Multnomah County. They have the oral arguments at the end of September. And I've been in contact with the attorney that's handling that. And as soon as we have a decision from the court, we're going to schedule the work session.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other announcements, we'll move on to item 9 on our agenda, which is Order 20-10-27-04, in the matter of adding 4 FTE deputy sheriff positions in the general fund within the Department of Public Safety by allocating up to $2 million in secure rural schools road fund reserves and up to $2 million in general fund reserve to provide 5 years of improved rural patrol services. And we have with us again Mr. Moker Heisky, our county administrator, and you can introduce the others that will be presenting.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I believe Sheriff Harold is here. And Sheriff, you're welcome to turn your camera on if you'd like to. I'm going to make some introductory comments and then turn it over to the Sheriff. We also have Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director, here to answer any questions that you may have. I believe Christine Moody, our Budget Manager, is with us as well. So you see a few graphics behind me. Sorry, it probably would be better to see them on the screen. And maybe we can actually, what we'll do is take the, well, people want to see it larger, they can adjust their monitor. But I wanted to just touch on sort of paint the bigger picture for you and talk a little bit about what we've done over the last several years to structurally balance, stabilize our budget in the public safety system. And just start with I think everyone is familiar generally with this graphic, this bar chart that represents the secure rural schools funding that Lane County historically has received. And this goes back to the early 2000s, and it shows you over the past 20 years that we've seen, and this is an older chart, but it's actually a 93% reduction in federal funding. We used to receive inflation adjusted $40 million per year, 20 million approximately in the general fund, 20 million approximately in the road fund that supported general services. And much of that was for public safety services. We know that due to that reduction and due to various factors that those funds have all but been eliminated. And the other thing I want to point out, we always talk about this during our budget process, is our property tax rate in Lane County that we have. Lane County has one of the lowest, the 7th lowest permanent property tax rate of all 36 counties in the state of Oregon. If you actually look at per capita revenue, so all local revenue, property taxes and other revenues collected by local governments, Lane County is the second to third lowest in total per capita local revenue that's collected. And a good part of that is our property tax rate at $1.28. And we oftentimes get the question, why does Lane County have such a low property tax rate? Well, it's because we had all of this federal money for decades and decades. We had federal money that helped support from logging on federal lands that helped support funding of public safety, largely public safety and other public services in our community. And so we didn't need a high property tax rate. If you look at Marion County and Washington County and Clackamas County and other counties we oftentimes compare ourselves to, we didn't need a large property tax rate because we had all of this federal funding. Then the federal funding is declined by 93% and property tax caps go into effect in the mid 90s. And it really becomes this perfect storm where Lane County is frozen at its current rate at $1.28, the 7th lowest of any county in the state. And that federal money has dried up to support local services and primarily public safety services that have been decimated over the course of the past couple of decades. What Lane County has done in response to that is over the past 7 years, I think really starting in 2013 with the approval of the public safety levy that was renewed again in 2017 for another 5 years, allowed for, and you can see, hopefully you can see this chart that we often show, that before the public safety levy, we had approximately 125 local beds in the jail. And you see what the sheriff's office has been able to do, and the sheriff can provide an update, a more updated version of the beds that are available there. But that was a critical component of beginning to stabilize and repair our public safety services. And then this graphic that you see has really been our focus over the last several years to talk about our public safety system as a system, as opposed to just separate individual pieces, that really all of these things fit together. So yes, additional jail beds are critical to stop that cycle of people, the revolving door at the jail that happened before the 2013 public safety levy. But it's not just jail beds. We also need the district attorney's office to have prosecutors that can actually deal with cases, and particularly with not only with felony cases, but misdemeanors. And so we don't have offenders that are racking up, large numbers of offenses and then being prosecuted for all of those, that we're actually intervening earlier in that criminal cycle and getting people connected to specialty courts, which has really been, I think, the hallmark of the newer trajectory of the public safety system here in Lane County. You hear this being talked about at a national level in national political campaigns about how we need drug courts and mental health courts, and we need diversionary programs. Well, Lane County has been doing this for many years because we've been forced to think differently about how our public safety system functions. Supervision, parole and probation is something that we've really worked on stabilizing our state funding to help support for parole and probation officers. We're then connecting. And so some of the things that we've done in our budget in the last several years, in addition to adding funding for new district attorney positions, to reduce the number of no files and do a lot of this diversionary specialty court type work. We've also made investments in parole and probation, including having parole and probation officers, new officers that are stationed in the jail and working with offenders before they exit the jail, making investments in behavioral health services in the jail. As you heard Captain Riley and the sheriff talk about, that the jail staff are really the ones that are embracing this model of the jail should not be the largest mental health institution in the community. So the sheriff's office has really embraced that idea of investing in different services. So you see all those pieces: jail, prosecution, supervision, and then the pieces in the middle, mental health and community-based services. A lot of continued investment that we are making in those areas. And what's remained over here is patrol in the corner. And aside from the fact that over the last several years, as our efforts to structurally balance our budget and get our own fiscal house in order in Lane County so that we don't, we stop the bleeding. We've talked a lot in the last several years about stopping the bleeding in our public safety system. We've done that. We have not had further erosion into that system. And in some strategic targeted ways, we've made these individual investments that I mentioned. And we've stabilized so that our patrol, we're now at a 24/7 patrol. We actually several years ago we weren't able to provide a 24/7 patrol in rural parts of the county. We now are able to do that, but we have not been able to crack this larger nut of really increasing our sheriff's ability to respond to calls for service and the need for policing in our rural areas. The sheriff will talk more about what the impact of that has been and what the impact of these investments will be. But I just wanted to touch on that. This is really, as we talked about during the fiscal year 2021 budget several months ago, we had this conversation and the sheriff talked about how this is the one area of the 10-year public safety plan that has remained difficult to address because the cost is so large and we really need ongoing stable funding. So I will conclude here just by saying that what's in front of you is, I think, the culmination of many years of work to structurally balance our budget, to maintain and enhance targeted services, and to finally get ourselves into the position where we can make an investment over a several-year period of time. And that's what we're talking about doing here, is $2 million in reserve SRS reserve funds in the road fund that are allowed to be used for rural patrol, and $2 million in reserve funds in the general fund from SRS that would have otherwise gone to help support the construction of a new Justice Center. And that's a project that we'll need to come back to here in the coming months and years. But we know that, and the sheriff can talk a little bit about up the McKenzie Valley and the other challenges that we've seen more recently that have really called our attention to this problem. So I will say that over the last 6.5 years that I've been here in Lane County, I have preached time and time again, one-time money is for one-time expenses. And the first question that I ask myself and that others have asked in this process is, how can we take reserve money and apply it towards ongoing expenses? And what we're doing here is taking reserve money and funding a 5-year investment, just as a public safety levy would do. We're funding a 5-year investment and saying to the community that this is an investment we feel like is a critical priority, and the last remaining initial gap, there still is much more investment that's needed in our public safety system, but the last remaining initial gap to fill in providing adequate public safety services, particularly for our rural communities. So is this an ideal proposal? No, it is not an ideal proposal. An ideal proposal would be one, and I think the sheriff would say the same thing. It would be long-term stable funding revenue from the community that would allow for these services to be ongoing in perpetuity. But we don't have that in front of us. And we do have the need to respond to critical issues that are happening, public safety challenges and concerns in our rural community. And so I do feel that this is not only an appropriate, but a necessary action to take given where we are at in the structural balance of our budget to make an investment in a message to the community that this will be a 5-year investment. And after that period of time, we can engage in a conversation with the community about the need for longer term funding. So I don't want to chew up the sheriff's time because I think he's the most important person for you to hear from, but I wanted to just share those initial comments. And Sheriff, I'll turn it over to you to add from there.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
And Sheriff, I just wanted to jump in to say, this is Commissioner Sorensen, and I have rejoined the meeting during Mr. Mokrahysky's presentation. I'm having technical problems. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity really to continue this conversation that we've been having. As you're aware, and as Mr. Mokrahysky just reviewed, Lane County used to be able to fund its operations through timber revenue and then replacement revenue through the federal government, which has decreased significantly over time. From 2008 to 2012, the Sheriff's Office eliminated 200 FTE. And since that time, the community has supported the public safety levy. That's allowed us to restore some of those lost positions in the corrections function of our office, and has certainly significantly improved our ability to deliver those correction services. However, delivery of law enforcement services to unincorporated Lane County is still significantly under-resourced. Back in February of this year, the board received a presentation from the Public Safety Coordinating Council Chair Paul Solomon on the Lane County Community Public Safety Repair Plan. And that report states that all portions of the Lane County Public Safety System, as Mr. Mokrahysky was just discussing, have been successful in moving from phase 1 into phase 2 of the plan, with the exception of Sheriff's Office Patrol. Currently, our 25 FTE deputy sheriffs that provide response for unincorporated Lane County is 25% of what our office had available in 1979. 25 FTE means that we're only able to field about 3 deputies on a typical shift. And you may recall the graphic that we used. This requires our deputies to zigzag back and forth across the 4,600 square miles of our county during a shift to respond to those life safety in progress calls as we are able. So we had this conversation in early 2020. We had the conversation during budget presentations discussing, you know, what steps can we take to improve the situation. And since budget presentations, Mr. Mokrahysky and myself and Mr. Hurley have had conversations about strategies on how we can make an improvement in this part of our office. So this proposal that we get to talk about today is very exciting. I do have to point out this is for FTE. It doesn't get us into phase 2 of the Community Public Safety Repair Plan, but it certainly is a significant step forward on that path. And it's going to allow us to do some things that I think are uniquely important now, considering what's gone on here in this year. And first, just to talk about the McKenzie River Valley. So in the past, the Sheriff's Office has had some grant funding that allowed us to have a resident deputy program. We don't have that funding anymore. We don't have that program anymore. But the last time we had a resident deputy program, we had a resident deputy assigned to the McKenzie River Valley. And in fact, that was Deputy Russ Olson. And during his time up there, just as we know can happen when you assign a deputy to a specific geographical area, they began to build relationships with the community, and that increases efficiency of effort in many different ways. And as the McKenzie River Valley experienced this historic event, the Holiday Farm Fire, Deputy Russ Olson was on duty that night. He was one of the first people that responded up there to help with evacuations. Since the fire, we've had Deputy Russ Olson assigned to the McKenzie River Valley because we recognize just the significance of the event and the significant unique need that area is going to have as they attempt to recover from this natural disaster. Having a deputy that already is familiar with a lot of the folks up there, stopping in, checking in on them, responding to their reports of theft from their properties, which they're not able to safeguard themselves in the normal way right now, has, we feel, been significant for the community. We've heard a lot of positive feedback from the community. And we recognize the recovery for the McKenzie River Valley is going to take a period of time. And not having a designated resource means that one of those 3 deputies on a typical shift is going to be responsible to responding to calls for service. And what that would look like if we didn't have a designated resource would be a phone call in to tell us that an item had been stolen from what was left of their affected home. And we would end up telling that person to file an online report. Whereas with having a designated resource, we're actually going to be able to do some follow-up on those cases, and in fact already have done some follow-up on those cases. I just recently, actually within the last hour, found out that Deputy Olson was working in the McKenzie River Valley yesterday, and we gotten information from Red Bluff, California, about an abduction of a 7-year-old child who it was a parental abduction. The parent doesn't have current guardianship. And it's because Deputy Olson is familiar with this community and has connections to this community that he, in fact, located this 7-year-old child last night, was able to get that child back into the custody of the grandmother in coordination with Red Bluff, California. So that's just one example of what having somebody assigned to a geographic area does for us, is that relationship building and that efficiency of effort as we try and handle our calls for service. The other thing it's going to allow us to do, and we're talking about 2 deputies assigned to the McKenzie district. It's basically a district we've formed out of the combined boundaries of the Upper McKenzie Fire District and the McKenzie Fire District. And the reason it's 2 deputies is they would work opposite days off. The deputies work 4 10-hour shifts. And so opposite days off, it allows us to have a deputy assigned to the area daily, with the exception of training and vacation. What it's going to enable us to do is really keep track of their activity, just like we do for our contract cities of Creswell and Bonita. The sergeant down in the Creswell contract provides a monthly report to the Creswell City Council about the activity that's gone on within the Creswell contract. So there's 4 deputies contracted to Creswell. And so the sergeant's able to provide that reporting of what happened in the last 30 days in the Creswell contract. We don't really have that ability in unincorporated Lane County outside of the contract cities, but we're going to do that for this district, this McKenzie district, so that we can talk about what have those 2 deputies been up to, whether it be response to theft complaints, assault complaints, traffic safety complaints, etc. So it'll allow us to provide that sort of information. The other 2 positions that we're talking about today would be designated to provide patrol and law enforcement response to the West Lane area. This is a district we've defined as everything west of Nelson Mountain Road, which intersects both Highway 126 and Highway 36. This area also, when we had the grant funding, had a resident deputy assigned. We haven't had one for a number of years now. And for obvious reasons, this area is the most difficult location geographically within our county for us to serve from a centralized office. And as you can see, when we're fielding typically 3 deputies a shift, there's really no way to provide resources other than a centralized office. You couldn't assign one of your 3 deputies just to one area of the county. The call load just doesn't permit it. But with this proposal today, we would assign 2 deputies. Again, they have opposite days off to that West Lane County region that's so difficult for us to serve from our office in Eugene. The other thing that's going on in West Lane County right now that's pretty exciting is that in 2019, we've talked a little bit about this in the past. In 2019, a pilot program was funded through a grant with Lane County Health and Human Services, and it's called the Western Lane Mobile Crisis Response. That is a pilot project. It's being housed by the Sayusla Valley Fire and Rescue, and it is an alternative way to respond to folks in the community who may benefit more from a trained crisis response worker due to their mental or behavioral health concerns. And so mostly we've heard about a Cahoots style model when we're talking about the way that we change law enforcement responses to mental health or behavioral health crises. And so this is more along the lines of a Cahoots style model. It's not quite as robust. The Cahoots model has an outfitted van, a paramedic, and a crisis worker. The Western Lane Mobile Crisis Response Program is a crisis worker that responds from Sayusla Valley Fire and Rescue to these calls for service. And in 2019, they started with only service within the city limits of Florence, primarily because if they situation becomes dangerous and they need a police response, the Florence Police Department is able to provide a police response in very short order, similar to the Cahoots, which operates really just in the metro area of Eugene and Springfield, where a police response can happen within just minutes. The program, the Western Lane program, desired to move out into unincorporated Lane County in the year 2020. And in fact, they have. We've had a number of meetings about how they can do that, but still has the dilemma of if a crisis response worker heads up Highway 36, ends up in a situation that is dangerous and needs a law enforcement response, oftentimes that law enforcement response is at best 45 minutes away. So having resources assigned to Western Lane County will allow us to better partner with the Mobile Crisis Response, which at the Public Safety Coordinating Council, we've spoken a number of times about that potentially being a pilot program that could be replicated in other areas of unincorporated Lane County as a response model, which we would love to see. Currently, we have a lot of collaboration with Stanislaus Valley Fire and Rescue, the Florence Police Department, the Oregon State Police Department, which does have an outpost in Florence, Peace Harbor Hospital, and Stanislaus Outreach Services are all engaged in this project. And it's a fantastic resource to have available to our community. This delves right in with the conversation we had previously about the corrections facilities, providing the right type of resource as best we are able to. And so having deputies assigned over there will allow that relationship building with the community and also with the partners to make that a more efficient service in Western Lane County. And then obviously the fact that we have a dedicated resource in these two geographically separated areas, that's going to provide assistance countywide, because rather than one of the three deputies having to respond to Dune City south of Florence from Eugene, if it's during a time where our designated deputy is working over there, they'll be able to handle that call for service, which means the three deputies are able to continue to work on the list of calls for service for the shift. So it's a fantastic opportunity. And we've said before, our staffing resource for this particular function of our office is so low that frankly, any ad is significant with our ability to provide service. And so appreciate the opportunity to have the board consider it today.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Well, I just at least want to state my appreciation for consideration of the McKenzie River area. They've needed it for a long time. We've all needed it all over the county for a long time, but with the fire up there, it just exacerbated the whole situation. And people are struggling to return to the area without some kind of sense of safety. You know, they need to put sheds back on their properties to store some things as they're rebuilding, and they can't feel secure about doing that without some patrol or some oversight. This is a big deal. Adding, 4 staff members for your department for rural services is a big deal to our community. I know you've been working on it for a very long time, and I appreciate the two of you melding minds and figuring out how to get it done. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, and Commissioner Farr, I saw your hand up. Okay, we'll do a round. The first one that I know constituents of the McKenzie River will ask is, are the 2 deputies in addition to Deputy Russell as a resident deputy?
So the answer is no. The 2 deputies would include the position that Russ is currently occupying. And in fact, we've already chosen Deputy Tom Spelgridge in hopeful anticipation that we would be successful today. Tom has a pretty great story as well, great in some ways. He's actually one of the deputies that I had to lay off in 2008. He'd been with us for about 5 years. And he was a young man starting his family at the time, and I had to go out and deliver him layoff paperwork. He was successful at having a job at Springfield Police Department for a number of years, and then we were successful at getting him to come back home about a year ago. He came back on as a deputy sheriff. He lives up off the McKenzie Highway and was super excited at an opportunity to work in a designated district in a community policing model where relationships get to be built with the community. So it'll be those two individuals for the district.
Very good. That's good to know because I knew I'd get asked that question right away as a way to permanently fund their positions. That's an excellent opportunity, as you said. This is not an ongoing stream of funding, as you both mentioned. And so my question is, although we're using reserves now, how do we make sure that we can afford this? And after 5 years, what do we do?
Yeah, and I'll share with the board my thoughts on that. Prior to the Holiday Farm Fire, I'd had the opportunity to visit a lot with the folks up and down the McKenzie, and we were having some really terrific conversation about forming a law enforcement service district. The district that we proposed forming is the exact same district that I'm proposing staffing for the next 5 years right now. It's the combined boundaries of Upper McKenzie and McKenzie Fire District. And the idea, again, was based on our contracts with the City of Crestwell, City of Anita. We have a dedicated resource for a district, and we're able to provide information to a community, maybe an advisory council or something along those lines, on what that resource is doing in the district. Clearly, with the devastation that occurred with the Holiday Farm Fire, now is not the time to introduce a law enforcement district idea. However, I don't know what the next 5 years holds. I don't know what recovery looks like. But perhaps at the end of the 5 years of funding, we would be in a position to see if the community wants to form a law enforcement district and have their own designated deputy sheriffs to continue there. I also intend to continue to look at other areas of the county that might be interested in having this type of resource. And again, it's such a significant difference between having a deputy sheriff that you have a familiarity with come and have some time to do some follow-up on your case versus a deputy that's really an emergency responder crisscrossing the county. As proud as I am of our deputies, I am incredibly proud. They do fantastic work. When a main office deputy is zipping up to McKenzie Highway or zipping out to some other part of the county and they know that there's 20 more calls pending, there has to be some sense on the community member's part that the deputy's trying to move quickly, because that's what they do all shift long. And so this designated resource allows us to spend a little time, build a relationship, working on the case. And frankly, we've seen success at solving cases that we otherwise would not have solved because of those community relationships. The deputy ends up knowing 3 or 4 or 5 different folks. And so they get all the different pieces of the puzzle that they need to make a case versus simply taking a report from a person who's been victimized but not having those missing pieces. So it's my hope that we would be able to talk about the successes that we have when we have a designated resource for a district, and then potentially have those conversations with other areas of Lane County to see if they might be interested in that sort of resource.
Thank you. And my last question is, you had mentioned that this would not get us into phase 2 with the resources and services we need in our public safety plan. What more is needed in order to add to this that would get us into phase 2?
Yeah, phase 2, and I actually have the plan in front of me. Phase 2 consisted of, for patrol, 5 deputy sheriffs, a sergeant, and a detective, and then an additional detective for forensic, computer forensic specialty, as well as 2 support staff for the additional support. Although internally we've done some adjustments, I think the support piece is probably covered. So what remains of the phase 2 need outside of these 4 positions would be 2 detectives, a sergeant, and 1 more patrol deputy sheriff to get us to phase 2.
So we're basically halfway there.
Right.
Okay. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. You've done a very effective job at asking the questions that I was going to ask the sheriff, and the sheriff was clearly prepared to respond. You know, one thing I will mention, Sheriff Harold, is that every time you talk about providing services in the right place at the right time, for instance, in this case, Western Lane Mobile Crisis Response, your eyes light up. You talk about treating people rather than incarcerating people. You talk about getting people to the right service as opposed to responding to crime. And to me, that attitude is prevalent throughout your department. I just love seeing it in operation. Regarding the public service, phase 2, Chair Buck asked the questions, the answers were provided. The only thing I would like to say then, in addition to the questions that have been asked and you provided, Sheriff Harold, is it's a shame that Commissioner Bozievich isn't here for this conversation, because he has been integrally involved for years now with the PSCC and with trying to provide additional rural patrol. You know, talking about the public service district up the McKenzie is something that is very, very important. And I think you're poised to do such as a continuation of the motion as it passes today. So Chair Buck, with that, I don't have any further questions. And if I get a second to this motion that I'm going to make right now, then people can continue to talk to the motion. So I am prepared at this point, Chair Buck, to offer a motion to pass Order 20-10-27-04 in the matter of adding 4.0 FTE deputy sheriff positions.
I would like to state the only reason I can't second that is I just had a few questions that would help me second that, Commissioner. I apologize.
Then I will pause my motion and wait for the questions. They may or may not be able to ask as questions to the motion, but I will defer to Commissioner Burney, Chair Buck.
Go ahead, Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, and I apologize. I would want to. I just had to ask these. First, a technical question. Does everybody, I see a big blue thing at the bottom of our screen, or is that just me?
I did ask Diana about that, so
okay.
There's a technical issue happening.
Gotcha, because I was so hoping when Mr. Mokrahysky had his charts that we could be bigger so I could see what he was referring to. My question, is this the exact same motion we discussed earlier? Because maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like it's grown. Am I incorrect in that?
Oh, well, there have been various iterations. This is the only proposal that's been before the board. There have been various iterations of this conversation, I would say, going back. I'm not sure it's been 6 months, but it's probably been at least 4 or 5 months between the sheriff and I. The budget committee had some conversations about the potential amount of funding that could go into that. And what the sheriff and I have worked on more recently is this proposal that you see here in front of you.
Okay. First off, I'm going to support, this is obviously a move in the right direction. It's not the complete move as the sheriff indicated. And I've publicly and privately stated my support for moving in this direction, especially as it relates to enforcement response time in rural areas. I just see that as so critical. I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I agree with Commissioner Farr. I wish Commissioner Bozievich was here because I think he'd be able to answer some of these questions. I thought what motivated this, because this is entirely reserve funds, 2 different reserve funds we're tapping in this proposal. I thought the driving force here was the horrific Holiday Farm fire and the need for more patrols in that particular context. And I see that this now covering a couple of the rural areas of the county. Am I incorrect in what the driving force was to enable us to start moving in this direction?
I'll just make a couple comments. Commissioner Burney, appreciate the question. Recall during budget presentation, we actually had a conversation about the sheriff and where is your proposal? And Mr. Martin,
I think I asked that. You're right.
I remember. Mr. Mokrahysky mentioned at the conclusion of budget that we were having conversations about how we could address some of those needs, and we were having conversations. Remember about the SRS Road Fund Reserve and how it's allowed. It's an allowed revenue for sheriff patrols, but there needed to be a little more conversation between Mr. Mokrahysky, Mr. Hurley, and myself. to make sure that we looked at them holistically. And so we were having those conversations actually before the Holiday Farm fire on how we could potentially use some of those funds to improve the unincorporated law enforcement response. And then, of course, everybody's schedules, frankly, were busy in 2019, but 2020 taught us that they could be even busier. And so the talks got delayed while we responded initially to the Holiday Farm fire. And then certainly I felt an increased sense of urgency to do something particularly because of the devastation of the Holiday Farm fire. And so it's probably changed, well, not probably, it's certainly changed a little bit, sort of the way I would propose to utilize the ad in unique ways. But the conversations were happening before the fire.
Thank you very much. Steve, were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, it was just everything the sheriff said is completely accurate. I would just say, I kind of reiterate some of that and add a little bit to it that we started off during the budget process and shortly after the budget process with these sort of big concepts. And then fast forward to the Holiday Farm fire, and that really, that incident and the response and recovery afterwards, I think really helped focus the sheriff and my thinking around this. To say, well, maybe we do something that's more micro and targeted around that need, and then we went from there. So for this broad concept to a very micro concept to saying, really there is a need beyond just that area, and so how do we do something that's in between this big concept and this micro concept that is sort of balanced and equitable for residents across the county, recognizing that it's not going to be, as the sheriff has said, the complete package that's ultimately needed. So that was my initial response to the question, is this what we were talking about originally? It's gone through various sort of iterations. And I, for one, feel as though we've landed on a proposal that's in front of you that is the best of all of those options that had been discussed.
No, thank you. The chair stated that you melded your minds, and since I have no idea what that is, just kidding you, Chair. I would like, before we'll support, ask Commissioner Farr if he wants to restate his motion. I think two things. One, having the opportunity at the chair's direction to attend a good many of those interagency cooperator meetings back when the fire was raging, and hearing Sheriff Harold always being one of those that made a presentation, and seeing the respect with which he and the county sheriff's office were held in by the various fire crews was really something to see. I remember one or two of them said they'd have a new brother in our chief. So I just see the interconnection here. I start to see the sheriff. Something that's always intrigued me and that I almost like to reiterate and almost build into my expectation in supporting this is you talking about law enforcement service districts as a mechanism to provide longevity and perhaps even push us into what you call phase 2. I would hope that within and you mentioned you don't know how things are going to look as time goes on. I would hope that 2 years into the 5 years, both in West Lane as well as in the McKenzie area, you can talk to us more concretely about whether districts are forming or how you are guiding the formation of them or the consideration of that in those areas. Because we need to do this, but we also need to exploit this commitment from the county to create, I think you'd agree, long-term funding for enforcement and services in these areas. So that's the only thing I would reiterate, maybe even add as part of the motion, some sort of a review specifically of institutionalizing funding to maintain or expand this level of support after the 5 years are over. With that, Commissioner, I'm ready to second anything you got.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And so Commissioner Burney, you suggested maybe a little bit of an addendum to the motion. I wrote down this quote, and I think it's a little paraphrase. You said, 2 years into this, let's exploit it to drive long-term funding for service in these areas. That's not exactly what you said, but that's the intent.
Yes.
So I would love to add that as part of the motion if it doesn't confuse the motion too much. But Chair Buck, I'd like to make a motion to pass Order 2010-2704 in the matter of addendum 4.0 FTE deputy sheriff positions, etc., with an addendum that in 2 years will review the progress and success of the sheriff's department operations in these two areas, and consider for the future long-term funding for the two districts in question. Does that cover it, Joe? Okay.
Close enough. Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Farr, second by Commissioner Burney. Any other discussion?
Yes, this is Pete.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm sorry for my technical problems in getting on the video, but through Ms. Jones' help, I've been able to get on the audio. I just want to say that this is really a great move to try to deal with our road reserves. I mean, our secure road fund reserves. And although it's not always a good idea to use reserves for operations, I think this is a creative idea, and one that, because of the circumstances, we really need to improve the public safety response for the McKenzie area in particular. And I want to thank the Sheriff, Commissioner Buck, and anyone else involved, particularly Mr. Mokrahysky and anyone else involved to come up with this. And I'm pleased to support the motion. Thank you.
I believe you may be muted, Chair Buck.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to add that I think that this is an excellent proposal that you're presenting to us today. We need to make sure that we have coverage all over our area. And to your point, Commissioner Farr, with the addendum, it did mention reviewing coverage for just these two areas. We do have a South Lane district that would need additional coverage too. And if we're considering additional coverage, it would be great to be able to expand that addendum to all of our rural areas if possible. It would also look like we need to adjust the resolution that we have currently, and maybe come back next week and put it on consent to add that additional language.
I accept the friendly adjustment asking that the second of the motion do that. And then if we pass it today, then to bring it back with a reiterated final phrasing last week as a consent calendar, presuming that I'd like to take the vote today, and then just have the wording perhaps more formalized next week. And Chair Buck, after the vote today, I do have a very quick question for the sheriff, if I may, after this vote. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm being asked to restate the motion for clarity.
Thank you. Then I will, Chair Buck, I move passage of order 20-10-27-04 in the matter of adding 4.0 FTE deputy sheriff positions in the general fund within the Department of Public Safety by allocating up to $2 million in secure role schools fund reserves and up to $2 million in general fund reserves to provide 5 years of improved rural patrol services. And that 2 years from this date, we review the success of the program and consider options for stable funding for rural services, for rural service districts in all parts of the county.
Very good. It looks like we got a nod from the second. Sounds great to me. And we'll have it come back, should it pass today, which I hope we do, I'll have it come back on consent calendar for formal approval by the board. So we have a motion on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused.
And a quick question for Sheriff Harold, if I may, before he hangs up. Sheriff Harold, I read from your weekly report that you were successful in identifying the arsonist in the Sweet Creek fire, and that that case has progressed. Do you have just a moment to say what happened there?
Sure. You know, when that fire first started, in the very early moments, there were some indications given us by the fire personnel that it might be human caused. And so early on, we were dedicating patrol resources to get out there for the safety of the community, to do some evacuations, and also to attempt to locate persons potentially responsible. We also called in one of our detectives. It was the weekend, and so we called in a detective. So did the Oregon State Police to work with us. And they were able to zero in on a potential suspect early on. They did 2 different interviews with that individual, who ultimately did plead guilty and has already been sentenced for his role in causing that fire. So excellent teamwork and commitment to duty. And again, I'll just say, and I appreciate the board recognizing just the really terrific people that work at this office, who are truly dedicated to the community. I couldn't be more proud when I get to hear about the response to the Holiday Farm fire and just the incredible heroics that occurred out there. When I get to see the way that our jail deputy sheriffs work patiently and calmly and with great teamwork to work with folks who are in the midst of mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis, I'm just really proud of the staff of the organization. So thanks for taking a moment to acknowledge it, and thank you so much for this motion that you just passed today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheriff Harold, and hats off to Detective Smith and to CJ Mann for Lieutenant Mann for bringing the operation together over that weekend. Thank you, Sheriff Buck.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate all your work and all your staff's work. So we have one last item really on our agenda for today, which is our county administration announcements. Mr. Mokryski.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to do 2 things. I thought I'd give you an elections update and then respond to the questions we had this morning about winter shelter needs and efforts. So I'll do the elections update first. I think that's probably a little more brief and straightforward. Ballots received through Monday, October 26th were 133,268. That is a 48.79% turnout. If you compare that to 4 years ago, November of 2016, we had 63,988. So more than twice the return at this time 4 years ago. Today is the last day that the post office recommends returning a ballot by mail to ensure delivery no later than Election Day on November 3rd. So get your ballot. If you're going to mail it in, get it in today. Ballots must be received by any Oregon official at any Oregon official Dropbox site location no later than 8 p.m. on Election Day. So you do have until 8 p.m. next Tuesday if you put it in one of Lane County's 20 Dropbox locations. And we've seen 76% return. So of those 133,268 ballots have been returned, 76% of them have been returned at our Dropbox sites this year. So that's really good, I think, because it's a just very secure, direct way to submit your ballot. And we encourage people to vote early. It's one of the things that's been really helpful this year is we have a lot of early voting. And so it helps our staff to be able to process those so they're not inundated with all, hundreds of thousands of ballots at the last minute. You can check your voter registration and status of your ballot at oregonvotes.gov/myvote. Again, don't wait until last minute. Vote early. Be sure to sign the outside of your return identification envelope. That's oftentimes a common mistake people make is they'll fill out their ballot, seal it, and then send it in, but they forget to sign the outside. So make sure you sign the outside of your ballot, and then you can call elections if you have any questions. We're still seeing a high call volume, so be patient with our staff as they seek to respond to people that are calling. The number is 541-682-4234. That's the elections update. And thanks again to Cheryl Betchart and her great team in the elections office for the work that they're doing. On winter strategies and winter shelter work, I want to provide the board just an update. I've seen a lot of email traffic and a number of folks in the community who've been concerned about the lack of availability of beds. And I'll just restate what has been well, let me start just by giving you the facts that we did not have to turn anybody away. At the Lane Event Center, we had up to 80 beds that were between 80 to 100 beds that we made available for the freezing nights. We had 40, the first night we had 40 individuals stay at the Expo Center. 40 individuals at the Wheeler Pavilion. And then we had another 40 beds available at the Expo Center. We had 16 people there. Then there were 6 youth that stayed at the youth site I believe, at the First Methodist Church. So we did not have to turn adults or youth away. I should also note that the city of Springfield, while they were not able to identify a location to open up an Egan Warming Center, they did shelter 27 unhoused individuals in hotel rooms, and they paid for those. So I've been in communication with the city manager and assistant city manager in Springfield and appreciate really their great efforts and can-do attitude around this. And I will say that the Springfield staff has been really great to work with over the course of the past several months, particularly on these issues. And it's encouraging to me to see the engagement from Springfield. They've always been engaged in issues related to housing, but I'm seeing more, frankly, more engagement and activity over the past several months, and that's a positive trend. So what we've said, we hear oftentimes from our city partners that they don't have the facilities, so they don't have city-owned properties with which. That's something we've heard both from the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield, that they don't have a facility like the Lane Event Center to house folks. And so we've encouraged, though, the cities to do as the city of Springfield did, pay for hotel nights. That's a great thing to do, to pay for hotel rooms for individuals. Also to work with your school districts, because we know that the schools have large gymnasiums. And while we can't have hundreds of people in a large space, we can create separation and use those spaces in effective ways. And we know that the schools have underutilized, they have properties that are available. They have large spaces, gymnasiums and other spaces, and they're underutilized right now because kids are not in school. So that's something we continue to work with 4J and Springfield schools on, and we're asking our city partners who have typically closer relationships with the school districts because of the work that they do to engage there. Churches, nonprofits, or other private properties are also some things that we have looked at. So we, and I would just reiterate that one of the challenges we've had this year with Egan is that both from a volunteer standpoint, a lot of the volunteers for Egan are at-risk individuals. They're in higher age categories or have medical challenges. And so it creates a higher risk for them related to COVID-19. So the number of volunteers that Egan has available to it to assist has been depleted during the pandemic. Additionally, we used to be able to put hundreds of people at the Lane Event Center, and we can't do that because of COVID-19. And so you have this confluence of issues where, and then there's further a challenge that if we identify all these scattered sites, schools and churches and public buildings, the ability for the Egan staff and limited volunteers to staff those, given and what we ended up doing at the Lane Event Center was we were going to just open the Wheeler for Egan. We ended up opening 2 because we were trying to find another site and we couldn't get anyone else to identify a site. And so we said, we'll make 2 sites available at the Lane Event Center. We also recognize that it's easier, or I should say less challenging for Egan to staff these multiple scattered sites. As you can imagine, there's an inefficiency and a lack of economy of scale when you have these kind of micro sites and happening there. So this is a challenge that we're going to face over the course of, and of course, Egan doesn't really start until mid-November. So we know that 100 beds at the Lane Event Center is not sufficient, but I also just need to say, as we've said, whether it was the smoke event or other things, that oftentimes people come to Lane County and it's like Lane County needs to solve all of the community's challenges. And I really just need to say, we need partners here. We don't have all of the properties that are necessary. We don't have all of the resources. We don't have all of the staff to be able to solve the entirety of the problem. I will also say that every time one of these challenges arises, Lane County is typically one of the first agencies to step up and do that. And we are a public service organization, and we should, and we will continue to do that. But again, we can't go it alone. So we really need help and assistance there. I will also say, as the board knows, we had a joint elected official meeting with the city of Eugene within the last couple of weeks. You heard a presentation, and it was really focused on winter strategies and the partnership between the city of Eugene and Lane County, and bringing Springfield into that effort to identify between 500 to 1,000 new shelter beds. This is different than Egan because Egan only opens during freezing nights, but they really are connected. So we are actively working, and I just want, when people see an article in the paper that says we're opening 100 beds on a freezing night, I think to some people that sends the message that's all you're going to do for the winter. Well, no, that's not. That's what we did for 1 or 2 freezing nights before Egan activated for the season. But we are actively working. The city of Eugene is making available 75 to 100 new beds through their Rest Stop program. Lane County has purchased 120 pallet shelters, and these are, the board knows because of our wildfire recovery, this is a new strategy that we're deploying, these sort of quick pop-up structures that can be used and placed on parking lots or flat ground. We're deploying those pop-up shelters. I met yesterday with the city managers from throughout Lane County. Florence has asked for a number of these pallet shelters. Cottage Grove has asked for them. So we're deploying these pallet shelters to rural cities throughout the county, and then we will use them in the metro area as well. We've also put out an RFP for hotel beds. Unfortunately, we were hoping to get between 100 to 150 hotel beds that we could secure for the winter months. Again, COVID unhoused strategies. We only got 45. So when we put the bid out to hotels, we got 45 beds that were offered. We believe part of the reason for that is because of the wildfires, that we still have hundreds of evacuees and folks who have been displaced who are still being sheltered in hotels, and likely that has caused an inability for hotels to be able to offer up a guarantee of a certain number of beds. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get more, but that is a strategy. So up to 100 beds in the city's Rest Stop program, 120 pallet shelters, 45 hotel rooms that we've secured. And then Commissioner Burney asked the question about commercial properties, other properties. We're actively working with a local real estate agent on identifying a property. We've been looking at hotels and motels, and we toured a church on 18th and Chambers on Friday. We have not had great success in that effort. Some of it is the price point that a hotel wants is far beyond what we view as reasonable, or a facility may be available and the price point is right, but the configuration is not really workable for what our needs are. But I want you to know that that is an active thing that we continue to to look at doing. So I guess I'll stop there. I just want to reiterate that Lane County is a partner, an active partner with others in this effort. We're calling upon others to please step forward and work with us on this. We will leverage every available resource and facility and staff that we can for this, but we can't do it alone. The partners that we're working with in our cities and others on building these winter strategies, we think are promising, but just know that there are so many challenges that are sort of coming together at the same time that are posing really a perfect storm of great challenges for us and forcing us to really do things in a completely different way than we've ever done them before. So I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And Mr. Mokrzycki, I have a hunch that the fact that I asked you to talk about winter strategies and shelter, you were already going to do it even if I hadn't asked. Is that right? Yeah, I thought so. Because I want to point out that since you came, before you came, we didn't have any winter strategies at all. Didn't even have the term winter strategies. We started talking about that in, I believe it was about 2013 that we began addressing different and special needs for the winter. And we started that first year, we started talking about it in about October for the next month, and we didn't have any strategies in place. So really what we're looking at is not starting winter strategies, but doing something that I now call turning up the volume. I used to say turning up the heat. I don't like to use that word anymore. Turning up the volume on the need for the responses that you're talking about, Mr. Mokrzycki. And in turning up the volume, more people hear it, more people see it, and more people become a part of it. You say that people expect Lane County to provide the solution. And I will state that I believe Lane County does provide the solution, not entirely with our own facilities, but by once again turning up the volume so that other jurisdictions hear it and other jurisdictions respond. And then in turn, private citizens respond. 3 years ago, I went to an Egan training at the Episcopal Church on Hilliard Street. And the volume had cranked up on Egan at that point in time. It was standing room only for the training. I'll bet there were 250 people available for the training. And as we turn up the volume, more people become aware of how they can help within their own personal parameters. And they do, by and large, by Lane County stepping up to the plate, being the first quite often to provide facilities. We turn up the volume and other people hear it and other people respond. So Chair Buck, thank you for this time. And Mr. Mokrzycki, thank you for your response and the ongoing work. You get to report what other people are doing. And that is a most wonderful thing because you have a lot of people surrounding you doing a lot of things.
Commissioner Berney.
Commissioner Farr, I'm going to send you a song that my son, when he was playing high school, it was called Turn Up the Volume. That's exactly what you were referring to. Yeah, that's right. You know it. I'm just going to dive into a couple of particulars, if I may. One is in multiple conversations with the founders of Harbor of Hope, which is the group that is from the developer in Portland, and he's creating a lot of, actually they're purchasing a lot of hotels in different parts of the state in cooperation with counties. He indicated to me that Lane County is a real problem. They just can't find anything other than the 2 Cottage Grove sites. And he explained to me why. The key costs or the hotel in Lane County are about twice what really the market should demand. And I won't get into it here, but I'd love to share that with you because it relates to the ownership of a lot of these hotels. It's been in the family, etc. There's no interest in selling at close to a reasonable price, sadly. I believe that in the spirit of turning up the volume, one thing that we have been effective at, and I'm going to ask a specific question about this, is being a catalyst, a convener, which is what you actually initiated your conversation with, Steve, because you talked about school districts and churches. a catalyst, a convener, and also a broker of resources to help that happen. So I have a question, because I'm acutely aware of how correct your statement was. School districts do have, especially now, unused space. They do have many, not all, surplus property. Have we looked into the possibility of either co-funding with the Lane Education Service District or partnering with them and getting a grant for them to literally have a scope of work and a person whose job is to generate spaces at schools and enable them, facilitate their doing that? Specifically as it relates to winter strategies. I don't know if there would be time for this winter, but to put something in place to mobilize those latent resources which do exist and could contribute to sort of a regional network. Is that something that's been discussed at all?
I would say, Chair Buck, Commissioner Bernier, no, I don't think it's been discussed as it relates specifically to the schools. I think that's an interesting idea. And I will just say that, it does feel like every year that I've been here, we always are doing more and more and more for the winter.
Right.
And yet every year we end up in November and we go, what are we doing for the winter? And it's never enough. And so I think
you were, if I may, I think you were getting ahead of it this winter before the world changed.
Well, we were, and I'll just add, you were still asking questions, so I don't want to cut off your line of questioning, but I want to offer one thing that, we hired Sarai Johnson as our joint shelter and housing strategist. That position, and she's doing phenomenal work. She was really hired to focus on getting the shelter and navigation center up and running, and then doing permanent supportive housing, because we need 350 or more permanent supportive. You know what? She spent the majority of her time over the last at least 3 to 4, and she started in February, by the way, has been winter strategies. So this is right. So we know that we're going to need to rethink kind of what our strategy is around winter, and because that really was not what she was intended for, was developing winter strategies. She was intended to create this infrastructure networking for the entire system. So to your point, Commissioner Bernie, I do think that there's an opportunity for us to continue to think about how we address the strategies for the winter in more sort of sustainable ways.
Thank you. And I don't know if you'll choose to do this, because sometimes I know I can be the helping hand that strikes again. And I have to learn to stay in my lane. But to the degree that is of interest, I was listening to you very intently, and you're right. I mean, just between churches and school districts, I think the resources exist properly mobilized and structured to actually solve this winter strategies problem down the road. And if, having been on the Lane ESD board for about 12 years, a long time ago, to the degree that you'd like my help, I would love to help with something like that. I think it would be so gratifying. But thank you very much. And thank you for all that we're doing. And thank you, Chair, for all of your time.
Chair, if it's okay, just one other comment. I just want to make it clear, and kind of to the points that have been made here. If I come across with any frustration and sort of, around needing our partners, I think the frustration is probably more for the hate mail that we receive, that the county receives around, that's all you're doing. Why aren't you doing more? And the county is, so it's sort of like when with the agency that responds to a need becomes then the focal point for anger and frustration about, well, you're not doing enough. And so my comments are not at all intended to be a criticism of our partners in the community, more so to say we all need to be working together, right? The county has an obligation, our cities have an obligation, the schools have an obligation, the churches, that one agency is going to solve it alone. So how do we work together to figure out how we can all partner there? And I think from the advocate standpoint, what I'd encourage is just, let's have that mindset as opposed to attacking entities that are trying to step up and do good work. Let's try to figure out how we can convene and bring people together to identify solutions. That's certainly what we're trying to do.
Commissioner Bernie.
I simply want to commend that and articulate that Times of scarce resources and heavy stress are when it's most difficult to do what you just suggested. And yet that is our challenge. And I absolutely believe that is our goal. Thank you.
I think ultimately the county is really the convener of all of these discussions regarding homelessness and housing strategies for the cities, the unincorporated areas, the whole community. And as the convener, we keep trying to knock on doors of other agencies, entities, private contractors, commercial vendors. We're knocking on all these doors to ask for help for a solution to this. And not a lot of doors are opening for us. And that's really where we need the community's help. We don't have all the facilities. They're owned by various different folks, and we need access to those facilities to actually have a comprehensive winter strategy plan. If we don't have that access, we are going to be limited like we were this weekend, especially during COVID-19. We can't be limited. We know from last winter and the winters before that Eagan averages around 300 or more folks on any given cold winter night. With that many people, you need to have a plan in place to let them know where to be. A last minute plan doesn't get communicated very well, so they don't know that there's a place to go. With traditional Eagan sites, they knew which churches to be at and what the plan was at any given cold winter night when Eagan was activated. That's been blown up, and we're trying to figure out how to get that back together. We really need to have something in place with other agency partners that have space in advance enough to let people know where they need to be at, and to let the contractors who actually run these sites hire up and get supplies. They can't do it 24 hours before. They need the time to know they can, fulfill the need for any given night. And we must get those spaces open. I don't know what we have to do beyond knocking on their doors and asking politely. At this point, we have to be more forceful. This is a dire need in our community. These people cannot be out at 25 degrees at night on our streets. If the shoes we have to fill is that convener and that door knocker, I'm ready to wear those shoes. And I hope every commissioner is willing to wear those shoes with me. We need more help. If you're watching, please call us. We need your help too. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, for that. That appeal should be heard. And I'm willing to wear out those shoes, as I know you are and other commissioners are. As we were talking today, Chair Buck, it became evident to me that sometimes we have more success outside of Lane County than we have inside of Lane County getting people to respond to the things that we're doing. I got a message just moments ago from Rod Runyon from Wasco County asking for rules on our winter strategies. And it said this will be quite different than those permanent places that I toured with you, but similar in some respects, fence and so forth. Without rules and enforcement, there's chaos. But what's happening in Wasco County is they're looking at what we're doing here in Lane County, and they're performing winter strategies in Wasco, which is a lot colder than here, a lot drier also. But so Chair Buck, the words that you state should be resonant, because Wasco County's hearing, then why can we not get people to hear more clearly here in our own backyard?
Any other comments from commissioners?
Commissioner Buck, Chair Buck, I'd like to be recognized.
Please go ahead.
some time ago, I wanted to know if there was a mechanism for businesses who were dealing with the problems associated with homelessness, i.e. homeless people camping in front of their business, and whether they could sign up on a database, or whether people who might want to respond to Commissioner Buck's plea to contact us and call us, whether there was a mechanism by which volunteers could sign up on a county website. And Mr. Mokaicy, I'm wondering if either of those things are in place now, or if something similar to that is in place, or if you could let us know about that, because I continue to get questions from business owners, and I continue to get the occasional, not that often, request by people, well, what can I do? So I'm wondering if you could address those, whether we have a mechanism to stay in touch with these people.
Your question about a mechanism to stay in touch with, we have our human service information system, our HMI. It's actually
but
HMI.
specifically for volunteers. We need volunteers to help these nonprofit groups, to help us. Do we have any central mechanism where volunteers can sign up?
Well, I just want to be clear that the volunteers work for the nonprofit organization, so they volunteer with St. Vincent de Paul or with Carry It Forward. Those really.
And there's no central system. Then they just have to know what group they want to volunteer with.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, and I mean, what I would say is, what I was going to say is that, I mean, again, Egan has St. Vincent de Paul that runs the Egan program, has a really robust and dedicated group of volunteers. Part of the challenge is that group, the number of folks who can actually volunteer this year safely has been significantly depleted. So people that want to volunteer and assist with Egan that are, medically able, that they're healthy and we're following all the protocols, of course, around masking and distancing and sanitation and everything. But people that aren't at high risk for contracting, if they were to contract the disease, those folks we'd encourage to contact St. Vincent de Paul and sign up as a volunteer. That's definitely a need.
And similarly, if they want to help people that are hungry, they can sign up with Food for Lane County.
Right.
Or
right.
the Burrito Brigade, or other groups that are trying to help people get nutrition.
Yeah.
So there's no central thing. I don't know. It's something worth thinking about, that as Mr. Buck used the phrase, we're the convener, coordinator of all this, and we can't do it alone. But it does seem that a more aggressive use of volunteers and perhaps a county role in placing volunteers, or at least having to sign up for volunteers. And I also question whether or not we need a lot of help of volunteers who are working actually in their home, because so much of this can be done remotely. A lot of the help and a lot of the calling and other stuff that can be done. So I would just encourage a continual observation of that and our role in promoting the volunteerism.
I think certainly we can talk about making available the the resources for volunteering on our website. I would want us to be careful about taking on that role, because it's not core to what our skill set and responsibility is, which is serving directly the individuals who are unhoused and connecting with various resources. I would say United Way is also is another central point of United Way funds a lot of these organizations, is aware of all of them, has connections to all of them. So if people are looking for sort of a one-stop shop to access non-profit, you could go to United Way and say, I have this skill set. I'm really interested in serving this population. What's an organization that I can work with? United Way is really well placed to be able to sort of triage people and connect them with the agency that they'd be best suited and most interested in serving.
Commissioner Burney.
Well, dang, Steve stole my thunder. When I said three things, catalyst, convener, and broker, oftentimes what that means is you initiate new activity. You don't have to be responsible for it. You identify the infrastructure that already exists. And I was just going to respond, and you leverage that, especially when the needs are so great. So I was going to simply state to Commissioner Sorensen's point that really, I think he's talking about a central clearinghouse, technology-based in identifying and deploying volunteers to the correct agencies. And I would just say that's not Lane County, that's United Way. Lane County can work with United Way to really sort of fine tune the system. And even when it comes to knocking on doors, while I appreciate that 2 out of the 3 commissioners I can see are going to wear out their shoes, I'm going to make a lot of phone calls. And I think in that instance also, we can mobilize what are the agencies that exist? How can we leverage and help direct them? Because this is such a vast, unmet community need. And I appreciate those points the chair made as it relates to the kinds of planning considerations so that they're equipped in advance with the resources so they can be deployed on a moment's notice. But that's all I wanted to just add. Hope it wasn't too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was the last item really on our agenda, unless there's any other business for this morning. Doesn't seem like there is. It's good that we were able to have this discussion, extra time this morning to make sure that we could have this discussion. So I appreciate that from everybody. We are in recess until 1:30.